Next, a briefing on Homeland Security financing. Congressional staffers and security analysts briefed corporate executives on spending projections for the new Homeland Security Department and ways for winning Homeland Security contracts. Equity International hosted the 3-hour event on Monday.
Good morning and welcome to the Homeland Security financing briefing, organized and hosted by Equity International and sponsored by Infinity Technology Services. The proposed Department of Homeland Security, the Transportation Security Administration, increased agents for the FBI, better international terrorism surveillance, airport security, critical infrastructure protection. All of these and more are at the top of America's agenda as we race to prevent and respond to the continuing and expanding threat of more irrational, evil, and deadly attacks by al-Qaeda and other terrorists. To successfully meet the challenges before us, the administration has proposed, and Congress is appropriating, massive new amounts of spending. Dramatic new spending is also being seen at the state and local levels and by the private sector. The billions in new spending will pay for the best Homeland Security products and services. How much that spending is and will be, where it will go, and how the private sector can participate is the subject of today's briefing. We have an outstanding program for you this morning, comprised of leading experts on Homeland Security spending. We thank them for their time and commitment. We also thank our sponsor, Infinity Technology Services, a next-generation security platform developer, leveraging its world-class knowledge and experience in security planning and integration to develop broadband multimedia security devices. Here to provide welcoming remarks is Infinity President and CEO Richard J. Sharland, a proven leader with over 25 years of experience in managing complex information technology security programs and the driving force behind the founding of Infinity Technology Services in 1999. Mr. Sharland.
Good morning and welcome to this briefing on Homeland Security financing. My name is Richard Sharland and I thank Equity International for inviting us to be the sponsor for this morning's briefing. Our company is in the business of developing next-generation intrusion detection products for utilization on high-speed networks that operate in excess of 100 megabits and are very important for safeguarding corporations as well as government applications, not only within North America, but also overseas. We see Homeland Security as being the priority agenda for the next foreseeable 24 months to 36 months, and view it more than just as providing Homeland Security for continental United States and continental North America, but also from the virtual perspective, and by that I mean the Internet. As we all have become to understand, the Internet is a new force that has radically changed the way in which we must secure Homeland Security initiatives and critical infrastructure. Our company endeavors to provide the best products available to safeguard that critical infrastructure for the government, for the military, for financial institutions, and for health services. I believe this morning's briefing is going to be an excellent opportunity to learn more from the United States with respect to how they intend to finance Homeland Security. I'm very excited to learn about how the funds will be allocated and over which periods of time. Again, I welcome you to this briefing, and I thank you very much, Bill, for allowing us to be your sponsor. Thank you.
Our first session is a powerful panel on Homeland Security spending by the U.S. federal government. We are fortunate to have as our moderator Dr. Philip Anderson, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the director of its Homeland Security Initiative. Previously, he was the Director of Defense and Aerospace Content for IntelliBridge Corporation, a provider of customized internet-based intelligence advisory solutions. Dr. Anderson served as a Marine Corps officer for 23 years, and his military experience includes leadership of operational organizations from platoon through battalion with deployments worldwide. Dr. Anderson served as Principal Operations Advisor to the Commander, U.S. Marine Corps Forces Atlantic, where he conducted research and on-site analyses resulting in a successful anti-terrorism force protection plan for U.S. forces assigned to Haiti. Dr. Anderson.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I have the good fortune of introducing our panelists this morning. Mr. Bill Hoagland is the Staff Director of the Senate Budget Committee, and Mr. Scott Lilly is the Minority Staff Director of the House Appropriations Committee. As Staff Director of the Senate Budget Committee, Bill Hoagland reports directly to the committee ranking member Pete Domenici, a Republican from New Mexico, on fiscal policy legislation that comes before the committee in the U.S. Congress. Mr. Hoagland acts as a liaison to the leadership of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, evaluates the fiscal impact of all major legislation, and helps coordinate budget policy in the U.S. Congress. With the Budget Committee since 1982, Mr. Hoagland has participated in all major budget legislation since that time, including the 1985 Graham-Rudman-Hollings Budget Deficit Reduction Act, the 1990 Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, and the historic 1997 Balanced Budget Agreement. He's extremely well-versed in macroeconomics, federal budget policy and procedure, agriculture, income security, and food and nutrition policy. Mr. Hoagland researches and writes widely on the federal budget, income distribution, and economic policies. He is our first panelist. Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone. I think Bill said many introductory remarks, something about experts on Homeland Security spending. Let me lay it on the line. I don't think there's any experts on Homeland Security financing, and I certainly put myself in that category, so I apologize at the outset in terms of my communications on these issues, because this is really a tough issue, a nut that we've been having real difficulty, at least at the congressional level, having to crack. I don't think there's any question that budgeting for Homeland Security requires first an agreement about what the definition of Homeland Security is. And unfortunately, since the attacks back in September, that definition of Homeland Security has been, if anything, an evolving concept, both in the administration and on Capitol Hill. And that evolution, if you like, has made an objective analysis of the spending or the decision-making or the trade-offs that extremely difficult for us who have to deal in the labor in the vineyards of legislative and financing and budgeting. It's been complicated, as you all know, also by the fact that the President back in October issued an executive order to the Office of Homeland Security to develop, coordinate, and implement a national strategy on Homeland Security, and that was to be completed sometime later this summer. That now has been overtaken, if you like, or integrated with the President's administration's proposal 2 weeks ago here now to create a new Department of Homeland Security. And I imagine as we go through this debate on Capitol Hill over the next couple of weeks and months, that definition of the Department of Homeland Security and what's in it, not in it, will continue to make it more difficult as we evolve. Now, this is more than just an academic question, as you all know. From a public policy point of view, it's critical that we provide the resources, target the resources on those programs necessary to provide for the security of our citizens. And we cannot guard against future attacks entirely, but we certainly don't want to jeopardize the public's confidence in its government, that we are allocating resources in such a way as to meet that basic responsibility of the government, which is to secure and provide for domestic tranquility. Now, so far, let me be clear that the definition of Homeland Security and financing for it began with that first $40 billion supplemental request and enactment last fall in the immediate aftermath of the attacks. But confusing to a number of people, including budget analysts, is the fact that that $40 billion, only about 8 of it, maybe close to $9 billion of that, was really for, quote, Homeland Security. We get these numbers all mixed up with war on terrorism, the Defense Department's funding, recovery efforts in New York and Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. So when you sort out all that, of the $40 billion that we appropriated last spring or last fall, only about 9 of it really was Homeland Security. So it's evolved from that point. Let me try to walk through very quickly the numbers and as it relates to 2002, and then I'd like to make a few observations about the funding for 2003 and where that may be headed. Before the attacks last year, we were funding, quote, there was a document that wasn't looked at very carefully before September the 11th. There was a document that we continued to, as a budget analyst, look at for funding for these types of Homeland Security protection. And we were funding in 2002, the President had requested for the fiscal year we're in right now, that we spend about $13.6 billion. After the attacks, as I said, out of the $40 billion, we added another $9 billion. So we were spending about $22 billion this year, post-attacks, for this broad area called Homeland Security. Now, Scott's committee is involved in a debate going on as we speak for the remainder of this week to add to that $22 billion this year another something between $5 and $8 billion for Homeland Security, bringing us to a total for this fiscal year that we're dealing with around about $27 billion. Now, this is where it gets really messy. When I look at the President's budget for 2003, get through 2002, go to 2003, if our numbers are right, then I see flat funding in the President's request post 2002 supplement, 2 supplementals, and this one we're in. I see flat funding as we go out in the aggregate. Now there are areas of up and down, but in the aggregate we're still talking about somewhere around $25 billion in total spending for 2003, including that which will go along with the Department of Homeland Security. But what are those broad areas? If I take this big number and I try to narrow it down, is where is the federal government placing its resources in this for Homeland Security? So far, and I'll try to break them down as roughly as I can. There's a lot of numbers here. But in order of priority, if you take what we were spending prior to September the 11th, add what will be added to, both with the $40 billion package last fall, I keep saying, and what will be added here possibly by the end of the week, but maybe not until after the 4th of July recess, it breaks down as follows. Physical security of the government, 33% of the total spending is in that particular area. Preparing for and responding to terrorist attack, of the total spending, about 22% is in that area. Interestingly, law enforcement investigation, about 21%. Critical infrastructure protection, only 14%. Physical security of our national populace. These are definitions used by the administration. 6%. And R&D expenditures for Homeland Security, only 4%. When you try to get beyond those broad definitions, where did we place our resources, increase our resources most rapidly after 9/11? And by percentage increases now, where I have identified most of the increases, the first, highest priority, nearly a 356% increase from what the President requested for 2002 and then post 9/11, was preparing for and responding to terrorist attack. That broad definition. And what is that? That's primarily funding, almost 85% of it, in the Department of Health and Human Services, biological and other public health related issues. The second largest percentage-wise increase post 9/11, 239% increase in federal resources, was in this area of physical security of the populace. Small percentage overall in terms of the 20, but that's where we're increasing most of our spending. And of course, that broad definition is basically the Department of Transportation and TSA. And I should add to, and Scott can add to this, I'm sure, but that in the debate that's going on right now for this week and next week on the supplemental, most of the increase is in the transportation TSA area. That's where most of the increases are being focused. Interestingly enough, the third largest percentage increase where we were focusing our resources was in the R&D area. Department, and this is broadly across all agencies, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, Treasury, FEMA. And then fourth of all, and this is basically most of the agencies, 27% increase for law enforcement, physical government security, and critical infrastructure. Now, as we go into this 2003 debate, we're adding to this. I see ups and downs, but I also am going to conclude here that that this will evolve, continue to evolve dramatically, both through the fall and possibly into a lame duck session and into next year. But based upon what has been requested for 2003, the largest increases are in those areas, particularly at FEMA, for supporting the first responders. Another extremely large increases in the Health and Human Services area for biological terrorism. And then continued large increases in transportation, aviation security, and then finally the largest probably focus will be in the area of border security. I want to, before I conclude, just take a minute to talk about the Department of Homeland Security. As I understand this week, the House has an ad hoc committee that's been set up to look at this Department of Homeland Security. In the Senate, you should know that the legislation is being considered by one committee, a given lead, and that's the Governmental Affairs Committee. Senator Lieberman, and chairman of that committee, expects that post the 4th of July recess that the committee will have reported an amendment to create this new department that will then be added to a bill that he's already reported out of his committee that when he would have set up his proposal for setting up the department. I think that objectives are clearly to establish this department by the end of the year. Some have set September the 11th. I think that's a little ambitious, just knowing the nature of Congress and what else is on the agenda for this summer and fall. But regardless of that, when I look at the distribution now, trying again to make all the pieces fit together here, when I look at the distribution of the funds requested for the Department of Homeland Security, and by the way, this will be, in terms of dollars, will be the fourth largest agency in the executive branch. It's right behind Defense, Health and Human Services, and Education, and it'll be the third largest in terms of number of employees. But nonetheless, when I look down where the money is going in this Department of Homeland Security, a total of requested of $36 billion for the Department of Homeland Security. What you'll find is that 62% of that department's funding will be in one area and one area alone: border and transportation security. Very heavy focus on Customs Service, Border Patrol, INS, obviously the Transportation Security Administration, and the Animal Plant and Health Inspection Service. And then 23%, the second largest, will be in this area of emergency and preparedness response, primarily FEMA, nuclear emergency response teams, and some areas in Department of Justice, Health and Human Services. About 10% of the agency's expenditures will be focused in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, and only 1% in the area of information analysis, infrastructure protection. Gives you some sense as to where the administration's thinking is, and as we go forward into the debates on Capitol Hill, I would imagine you'll see shifts and modifications that go, but just to give you some sense as to where the federal resources are being focused and targeted. I have to, as a budgeteer, and maybe this is, as I say, I'm not an expert in all this in this area here, but as a budgeteer, I just have to lay on the line, though, a complication from a stepping back. And that is, as a person who spent a long time at this budgeting in this town, I think you all have to realize that probably along toward the end of July, if not the first part of August, the administration will have to put out what we call a mid-session review. Our Congressional Budget Office on Capitol Hill will put out its estimates. And if no surprise to you, we have turned from $130 billion surpluses last year, 1% of GDP, to at least a deficit of probably at least $150 billion this year. A huge swing from surpluses to deficits. Now, a lot of that has to do with a drop-off, need not tell this group here, primarily in the receipts area, not in the spending so much. But I have to say that when those numbers start coming out officially, about the same time that Scott is trying to get his committees to finish up appropriations for 2003, I think the pressure will be on tremendously on non-defense, non-homeland security spending. But I also think that the focus to target these homeland security dollars will also take on a new interest by both the administration and Congress as they finally start to realize that we're back into a difficult deficit situation, which doesn't look like it's going to improve anytime soon. So I think costs will not, however, be held down as the President has thought they would be in the overall spending for 2003. Maybe they'll be able to hold them down through the election, but in a post-election situation, a post-lame duck, a 2003 supplemental, I expect costs to go up. I expect there will be supplementals next year, and pressure will clearly build on all spending as we go forth, which then I don't believe that the Department of Homeland Security or financing of homeland issues will be left out of the pressures that come from operating in a deficit situation. Let me close there and leave it to Scott.
Thanks very much, Bill. I think Bill's comments raise the possibility of numerous questions here, which we hope to be able to address in a few minutes. Let me go ahead and introduce Scott Lilly. Scott has served as the Minority Staff Director of the House Appropriations Committee since January 1995. He's responsible for the hiring and direction of the minority staff of the committee and for recommending overall legislative strategies with respect to discretionary spending to committee Democrats and House Democratic leadership. Previously, Mr. Lilly has worked as clerk and staff director to the House Appropriations Committee, executive director of the House Democratic Study Group, executive director of the Joint Economic Committee, a legislative assistant and staff director to Congressman Dave Obey, a bill drafter for the Missouri legislature, and a campaign aide to Senator George McGovern. He lives in Arlington, Virginia with his wife and 2 sons. Very happy to introduce Scott as our next panelist.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be on a program with Bill Hoagland again. He is has widely been recognized in this town as a straight shooter and somebody that's extremely good with numbers, and I frankly don't see anything that he's told you this morning that I disagree with. But I did want to try to give you a little bit of context in which to think about Homeland Security, because I think it's a more fundamental thing than we have been able to grasp in our minds in many instances. In less than 300 years, this country has evolved from a tiny society that was in a remote corner of the world to the dominant power in global affairs. That came about largely because of the security that were provided by two oceans. They protected us in times of trouble in Africa and Asia and Europe, and that degree of security allowed us to have a social order that was ruled by law rather than force. It allowed us to see the evolution of democratic institutions. It gave us an opportunity to let our people devote their energies to the creation of wealth and building better lives for themselves and their families. It provided investors with a stable environment in which commercial activities would not be disrupted by foreign armies. And in the absence of foreign threat, it provided the conditions allowed for potential for profit or loss to be gauged accurately, which allowed the evolution of our complex financial systems. The absence of foreign threats has also allowed us to invest more in education and research, which has created the current boom in technology and the new economy as we know it. But on September 11th, those barriers that were provided by the oceans seemed to almost disappear. And we've entered an era in which we not only suffered enormous loss of life and personal property, but profound loss in the feeling of security. And that is the struggle that we face now, restoring that security. Many politicians talk about that effort as a war. But in truth, we are far from being at war. Following Pearl Harbor, the White House asked the U.S. Commerce Department to go about finding out a way to measure total national economic output. The department's report became the basis for the modern concept of gross domestic product. And the purpose of developing a way of gauging gross domestic product was to see how much we could spend on the war. The goal was to put 50% of output or GDP into the war effort. Now, I don't think we can or should put 50% of our output today into the war on terrorism. But I think it is a good indication of how far the rhetoric that's being used today is out of place with what the effort that's taking place in Washington and the resources that are now being provided in the bills. I don't think that we should pour every dime that we have into the war on terrorism. I think there are a lot of bad ideas. I think there are a lot of roads we shouldn't go down that people, including probably some in this room, have ideas about how to get us down. But at the same time, I do think that a responsible, structured approach is going to require a lot more resources than are currently being discussed in Washington. Twice, by large bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress, we have developed proposals and withstood veto threats and insisted on significant increases in Homeland Security, which the President's own appointees insisted they needed, but which the President's Office of Management and Budget has steadfastly opposed. And while the committee and the committees in both the House and Senate have decided that many of the items in the executive branch agency requests were not urgent enough to include them in the bills that we produced either last December or the one that we're working on right now. They were struck by the number of compelling requests for counterterrorism funds that the Office of Management and Budget rejected. To put it bluntly, we are increasingly mystified as to why the administration's tough rhetoric on terrorism is not translated into its budget policy. One good example of this is in securing nuclear arms, nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, both here and overseas. Last December, we had a huge fight over whether or not we would expand the Nunn-Lugar program to try to maintain control over radioactive materials in the former Soviet Union. I've visited facilities myself where such materials are stored. When U.S. Department of Energy officials first visited those facilities, they were guarded by one soldier paid less than $100 a year, and he was asleep at the door of a building that contained literally pounds and hundreds of pounds of high-grade plutonium and highly enriched uranium. Today, that facility is guarded with concertina wire, with cameras, with heavy door locks, but it is in a compound that is filled with trees that have just grown up because no one cuts them down, and an outside barrier wall that can be pulled apart with your hands. It is in a neighborhood of in northern Moscow that is heavily populated with Chechen refugees. So that is still the situation that we're dealing with in terms of the security of Russian materials. We insisted that despite the fact that the President had not requested any money to expand those efforts, that they be expanded. That finally was included in the bill, but after a great deal of argument and dissension between the two branches of government. This spring, the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Abrams, appointed by the President, insisted on about $380 million in additional protection of U.S. weapons and nuclear materials. The House was able to put in a large portion of that, despite the fact that 92% of that request was rejected by the Office of Management and Budget. Secretary Abrams wrote to the President, "We are storing vast amounts of materials that remain highly volatile and subject to unthinkable consequences if placed in the wrong hands. These materials permeate the department complex, including sites under the programmatic jurisdiction of the National Nuclear Security Administration, the Office of Environmental Management, and the Office of Science. Although the initial supplemental and funds appropriated by Congress helped to respond to the most urgent near-term security needs, the department is now unable to meet the next round of critical security mission requirements. Failure to support these urgent security requirements is a risk that would be unwise." Despite that statement and his request for $380 million, they got $27 million. That was $220 million of that $380 was put in the House bill, and over $300 million is in the Senate bill. I think we'll come out somewhere in between, hopefully closer to the House number. But I think it is an indication of the kinds of things that are being left behind. Included in this, and we move nuclear weapons from one place to another to make sure that they are operating, that they are safe, that they're not deteriorating in ways that could cause problems. We have to put them on trucks and move them around on the interstate highway. The Secretary felt that what we were doing in terms of security of those weapons was not adequate. His request to upgrade that security was turned down. His request to upgrade the security at the national laboratories was not approved. His request to collect all the low-grade fissionable material that has accumulated at weapon sites around the country and put those in a central repository was rejected. So that's an indication of the kind of debate that's going on inside between the branches of government. It's usually not reported in the press, but you should be aware of it. Another instance was the Immigration and Naturalization Service indicated that they have 2,000 people who are responsible for going around and rounding up those who've overstayed their visas and getting them out of the country. There are 7 million such individuals. They said that they could not effectively go after all 7 million people with only 2,000 law enforcement people. And they needed an initiative to help them use databases to identify the most dangerous and potentially dangerous of these people, and to identify where they might be. That would cost $25 million. The White House said that was too expensive. They included no funding. We put that in the bill. The modernization of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I think, is probably the single most important Homeland Security issue facing this country. That Bureau is straddled with a computer system that is truly out of the dark ages. Very few agents in this country can send by computer a picture of a suspected terrorist from one agent to another. The software that operates on the existing FBI system is so antiquated that a major portion of the FBI workforce can't use it. It needs to be replaced with a new just a new modern system which will meet their needs. The system is called Trilogy. They asked for the funds last fall to complete that system. The President said it was not high enough priority to be in the budget. The Congress put all of the funds in the budget for that system. But there is a need, continues to be a need to enhance the security of that, and to go back and take all of the FBI records, which are most of them stored about 4 blocks from here. They are paper files kept in file cabinets, and like the ones that are in the New York office of the FBI, which had to be vacated when the World Trade Center was blown up. There are not copies of those files anywhere other than in that building. So they need to be copied. They need to be put on a computer system so that they can be accessed nationwide by those with clearances within the FBI to get to them. And they need to be kept in a place where they're backed up, so no matter where we might be attacked, we will have the ability to continue law enforcement efforts. The FBI wanted $120 million for that. White House said they couldn't afford it. Zero was included in it. We have $100 million in the House bill. There's a smaller amount in the Senate bill. We hope we will get to the House number. The Corps of Engineers indicated that they have begun upgrading security on 50 sites around the country, including Grand Coulee Dam and Hoover Dam, locks and dams on the Mississippi, but there are 150 more sites for which there has been no further efforts to upgrade security since September 11th. They indicated they needed $128 million to do that. The White House said it couldn't be squeezed into the budget. I would say, and Bill touched on this, I think it's a very important point. We not only need more money, we need much greater focus. We need much greater focus in the executive branch and in terms of administrative insight and administrative muscle. Perhaps the best example of that lack of focus and insight is what's going on in the Transportation Security Administration. The White House asked for $4.4 billion for the Transportation Security Administration. They were unable to provide us with any backup until late May, and it was actually early June before we started to get significant details. Among the details we got was the fact that they wanted to pay the security guards who stood next to the screening stations a base salary of $71,000 a year, which with the automatic overtime that had been proposed as part of that personnel system would have meant those guards were making $89,000 a year. That's not just here in Washington or at BWI where they've already started. It would be in every airport in the country. That's about 25% more than the airport managers make in many of those airports. After 2 days of press inquiries about the pay scale that had been put forward, they said that they had changed their mind. They were going to cut it back to about $64,000. When they testified before our committee on Thursday, they have now cut it back to $45,000. It's still above what teachers in many of the communities these people work in are paid, but it is an indication of some of the planning and thinking that's going on. It's being done in a very closed environment. There is no consultation outside of the department except with the Office of Management and Budget, no consultation on the Hill, and I think it has led that struggling new agency to go down a lot of bad paths. Among those paths are the magnitude of the workforce that they envisage, which would only in dealing with airline security include over 70,000 people, as best we can tell. We have not gotten a definitive answer from them on how many people they would have. They also plan to have, we were alarmed when we found out they were planning to have a headquarters staff of 800 people. We now find that it's over 1,300. It's grown to 1,300. The average salary that they project for that headquarters staff is $112,000, which is higher than the average salary of the Secretary of the Department of Transportation's personal office. It's also higher than the average salary in the Executive Office of the President. There was a story last Thursday morning indicating that the Undersecretary of Transportation for Security has just recently redone his personal offices and spent $410,000 on that renovation. I think that chaos goes beyond inadequate salary and planning for personnel, but in terms of the purchase of luggage screening equipment, which they are moving forward with rather rapidly, they have neglected to recognize that that screening equipment is larger than a minivan, cannot be placed in the lobbies of existing airports, and requires construction. In order to get it in time, which is the deadline is supposedly December 31st. I don't think there's a chance in hell that that's going to even come close to happening. But if it were, you would have to have begun construction for the facilities to put this new equipment in last January. They have still not approached that. They have not only failed to request funds for the construction of new facilities in which to house this equipment that has already been ordered, but they have refused to approve the plans of the airport authorities that have agreed to pay for it on their own and have submitted plans to the Transportation Security Administration to have that paid for. So we have an enormous range of issues with regard to the establishment of one of the agencies that have to fit within this overall structure. I was also asked to talk a little bit about the plans to create a new Department of Homeland Security. It is important to recognize that the responsibility for various things that relate to Homeland Security is spread across a wide array of agencies and activities in the government. And there's probably a good reason for that. If for instance, you're out on a Coast Guard cutter in the Caribbean Sea, you probably, instead of being tasked to do one specific thing in behalf of the federal government, you ought to be doing a number of things. You ought to be looking for illegal drug activities. You ought to be providing a backup for marine safety and rescue of both commercial and private craft. And at the same time, you ought to be looking for threats to the United States from foreign powers and terrorists. That's an example that can be repeated in one agency after another across the government. If you have a platform that can perform a mission, you ought to probably use it for several missions. But when the White House published their plans for Department of Homeland Security, they had an organization chart that showed 133 offices and agencies that were involved in Homeland Security. The answer to that problem was to create a department in which you consolidate authority. But if you look at what was absorbed in that department, only 20 of those 133 offices and agencies were absorbed. That means that 113 of them are still outside of the Department of Homeland Security. So you're only taking, one segment of activities and putting into this operation. Left outside, it will be the FBI and most of the federal law enforcement activities, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, which plays a significant role in counterterrorism, the DEA, which has a number of resources that are, even though they are supposedly going to be tasked in drug enforcement, have a lot of relevance to Homeland Security, the Financial Crime Center within the Department of Treasury. All of those activities will remain outside of the department. As will the CIA, which probably rivals the FBI in its importance to the overall Homeland Security. This department will have, according to the legislation that was submitted last week, not only a Secretary of Homeland Security, it will have a Deputy Secretary, it will have 5 undersecretaries, it will have 16 assistant secretaries, it will have, of a rank equal to undersecretary, a commandant of the Coast Guard, a director of Secret Service. It will also have a chief financial officer, an auditor, and 4 other offices equal to that of assistant secretary. So overall, about 30 different cabinet, sub-cabinet level positions. That's more than 3 times the size of the sub-cabinet level positions in the Veterans Administration, a department that is of equal size both in terms of budget and in terms of overall personnel. This department, in addition to Homeland Security, is going to have responsibilities in a lot of other areas. It will be responsible for all oil spill cleanups. It will be responsible for tariff collections. It will be responsible for pet store licensing. It will be responsible for boll weevil eradication. It will be responsible for ice breaking, international adoption policies, nuclear weapons research, mad cow disease, hurricane recovery, and homeless shelters. So the idea that we are creating a lot of focus in this new department, I think, is probably not a very sound explanation for why we're going to go down this route. I would also say that when we take agencies such as the Coast Guard or the Secret Service and we move them either organizationally or physically, we have a certain predictable upfront loss of productivity and efficiency. If you simply change the phone number of everybody in the Secret Service, you're creating a lot of chaos and a number of weeks of work loss. If you start trying to move an organization the size of the Coast Guard from the Department of Transportation buildings to other buildings that would be associated with the Department of Homeland Security, then you're really talking about months of lost man years in agencies and offices throughout that entire Coast Guard agency. And so I think that any decisions that are made in terms of this reorganization should be gauged in terms of how much will this improve efficiency this year. I think the answer is, in almost every instance, in negative terms. Over 2 years, over 3 years, over 5 years. I think because we're facing a very immediate need, as the communications from Al-Qaeda showed yesterday, that the idea that we go through this reorganization right now should be looked at very carefully. There's a reason that the Reorganization Act of 1947 occurred in 1947 and not 1944. We did not decide to make the Department of Defense during World War II. We consolidated the War Department, the Navy Department, and the Air Force into one department after the war was over and when we had a respite and could absorb the inefficiencies that reorganization make. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at, and I'm sure Bill would join me in welcoming your questions.
Thanks very much, Scott. Time is very short, so I want to lead off with the first question, then hopefully have an opportunity for some of you to ask your questions. In my experience, there's no shortage of mystery associated with the federal budget process, especially these days as relates to Homeland Security. Through your insights on how and where the money is being spent, Bill and Scott, your insights on the enormity of the requirement, as well as some insights on the administration's approach to the allocation of resources, I think that while you've raised numerous new questions, you have, to a great extent, cleared up many previous questions that we all have. My question for you relates to the future. There have been a number of studies done lately, most recently by Brookings and previously by the Teal Group, that suggests that by fiscal year 0506, we'll be looking at a Homeland Security budget of $45 to $46 billion. I wonder if either or both of you could comment on provide your perspective on how much money you think should be spent, and perhaps what you think will be spent on Homeland Security. Did these recent studies hit the mark, or are we looking at significantly greater expenditures in the out years?
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, first of all, I think you have to say, how do you define Homeland Security? And I think we are ramping up a lot of activities at the CIA that are extremely critical, but I don't know whether they're counting those within the total. The department, which I would say contains an enormous number of activities that have nothing to do with Homeland Security, but yet you might say, well, it's the Department of Homeland Security, we should count that as part of Homeland Security. Includes a lot of things like, they have people that this Transportation Security Administration is planning to have people that check people's tickets when they come through. Well, one of the questions we've asked is, why should the federal government be paying for that? Isn't that something that the airlines should be doing as part of their normal activity? And but nonetheless, that's added in. I would say that of the $37 billion that are within the department, we can be relatively certain that we're going to go to $45 to $50 billion just for those activities within the department. But there is this, the bulk of Homeland Security activities are, as I described, outside the department. And I think you're going to see very rapid growth in all of those. I think you have to see a rapid growth in all of those.
Very quickly, I was going to suggest also that we'll get to that 45, 46. We won't have to wait till 2004 or 5. We will probably be there in 2003. Again, as Scott said, depending upon the definition. And the areas where I still think that you're going to see a lot of increase, continued pressure, and that's in the public health area, expenditures there, plus, as I indicated, I think in the physical transportation infrastructure area. Both of those, I expect to see additional pressure and increases over and beyond that which is currently in discussion.
Great, thanks very much. Let's throw it out to the floor. Do we have the option to extend this just a little bit, or do we have to stop here in a minute or two?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, please.
James, there's a lot of requirements local, state, and city level. What can you make any comments relative to the funding and going down to that level?
One of the major areas of increases, of course, was in the first responders, which is a lot of FEMA money. I also, we didn't mention this earlier, but there's a lot of duplication and fungibility, if you like. And given the situation out in the West with the fires, you can expect more money going into FEMA, and you can expect more money going in overlapping with the Homeland Security first responders. I think there will continue to be pressure placed on particularly grants, state and local grants, justice grants for in the budgets that are coming forth. I also recognize that the same problems that I mentioned about the federal government's fiscal situation, the states are having the same situation, and so in a kind of a circular way, the pressure will be coming back from the states to address additional grants and assistance to carry out the responsibilities that are being mandated upon them by this new Department of Homeland Security and other Homeland Security activities.
I would say that I think the kind of budget crunch that we're in is not going to put the states in a very strong position to get additional funds. I think they have strong requirements, but the history has been that the federal government takes care of its own problems first, and until we are protecting our dams and providing the FBI with the resources they need, I don't think we're going to be handing out money to state and local governments in a big way.
Another question?
Since IT technology is really the backbone of both the federal government as well as all businesses, and it is probably most vulnerable right now more than it's ever been, I haven't heard anything on IT security. I mean, it's key to the survival both of government as well as businesses, and yet there's no focus on it at all, at least not in this discussion.
Well, it is woven into a lot of the budgets that we're talking about. I mean, there is and there has been for about 3 or 4 years now a significant activity at the Department of Defense and through the NSA on IT security. There has been a lot of money appropriated by my committee to upgrade the security of our defense establishment and our government-wide information systems. One of the issues that is in this Department of Homeland Security is a little office called the Federal Infrastructure Policy Center, which is really aimed at trying to stop people that are purposefully trying to break into government computers right now. I was relieved to find out that although the White House had initially put that in the Department of Homeland Security, and it really does not have a counterterrorism role as much as a counterintelligence role, that's going to be left within the FBI. But there isn't. What we're about here is really retooling every institution in this country so that it can withstand the kind of attacks that we're concerned about. And every agency and office in the federal government are going to have to think about information technology and the security of information technology in a totally different way.
Just real quickly, I passed over it really quickly when I went through the new department, and as Scott has already indicated, there is one of those major categories of the information analysis infrastructure protection, information infrastructure protection. It's kind of hard to say. But in that is computer security within NIST and additional fundings. Now, it's not a lot of money. Be honest about it. It's only about $15 million that are being put in there. But it is recognized, at least, that this is an issue, though it may not have the same profile as, say, the Transportation Administration or some of the border security. But it clearly is, you're right to raise it as an issue that's not being brought to a higher level of visibility.
$1 million doesn't sound like a lot of money.
No, it
Just
doesn't.
if you were to destroy GPS, the whole aircraft industry, both government as well as commercial, would be out of business over in seconds. And GPS is extremely vulnerable. It's just one element of a much larger program exposure.
I'm afraid we're going to have to end there. As you certainly might imagine, both of our panelists are extremely busy these days, and we could spend easily a day or two or more discussing these important issues. But we'd like to thank both of our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us and share their insights with us this morning. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
I'd like to thank Phil Anderson for an excellent job of moderating that important panel, and also Bill Hoagland and Scott Lilly for their expert opinions. While we're preparing for our next speaker, I'd just like to let you know that outside, you may have already seen the Directory of Homeland Security. This is an excellent publication, and we would recommend it to you. It's put out by our colleagues at Potomac TechWire. Also, you have a sheet to sign up for our next financing briefing, which is going to be on July 29th here at the National Press Club. We intend to provide you with an ongoing series of informative sessions providing the latest information on Homeland Security, and you can continue to find out about it as well as our other programs and the latest news on Homeland Security financing at our website, www.globalsecurity.bz. We are now excited to bring you a powerful and detailed presentation on total projected Homeland Security spending in 2003. To provide that presentation is Linda H. Taskett, a principal and the leader of Homeland Security and Defense for Deloitte Consulting. Deloitte Consulting is one of the leading management consultancies serving large public and private sector clients such as the U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, General Motors, and Bayer. Ms. Taskett has been with Deloitte Consulting for 8 years, where she has focused on large-scale technology-enabled transformations for some of Deloitte's leading clients, including Pacific Bell, ConAgra, and Northrop Grumman. Ms. Taskett has more than 24 years of experience in technology integration, where she has helped to solve complex business issues from financial performance improvement to supply chain integration in a variety of industries, including public sector, telecommunications, consumer products, and high-tech manufacturing. Welcome, Ms. Taskett.
Appreciate it. Good to see you. I'm going to give me just a second. Let me move this up here. Let's see if I can. Good morning. As Bill shared with you, my name is Linda Taskett, and I'm going to attempt to provide at least some clarity around what we're seeing around Homeland Security and defense spending. And what you'll find is that we really dove a little bit more into what's going on in the public sector from a state and local perspective, and then what's going on in the private sector. And a couple of points for you. Our insights have been developed through a combination of research, survey, and interview. Our research was sponsored by Aviation Week, and then we obviously appreciate the opportunity to share this with the folks at this conference sponsored by Equity International. One other note I want to share with you is that we announced the results of our survey on June 6th, which you will recall was the day that the Department of Homeland Security was announced. So more to come. What we're going to go through this morning is a definition of our study objectives and approach, what we put together as far as our framework for that study, the priority threats and the solution areas that were identified as a result of our research and our study, market size and the evolution of that market, and then considerations and approaches that we all need to be thinking about as we move forward. So what was our objective and then our approach? Well, our objective, frankly, was to just try to help shed some clarity both for ourselves and for you. We wanted to provide a better definition of Homeland Security. One of the things that we quickly saw was that there was no single definition of Homeland Security and defense that we were able to find. We also wanted to put a better definition around what really are the threats surrounding Homeland Security, and therefore what might the solutions be that we need to be thinking about, and then improve an overall understanding of what the demand for those solutions might be currently and then projected into the future. Our approach was a combination of research and then more than 300 surveys and interviews. We surveyed the private sector and the public sector. When we surveyed the private sector, we did our best to get a cross-section of the private sector so that it was balanced. We obviously went through analysis of the trends and the indicators that we're seeing, and we spent a lot of time looking at a lot of the emerging technology solutions, some more ready than others. So what did we interpret Homeland Security to be? Well, this is one definition. I'm sure it's not the end state definition. But the definition that we came up with was the proactive and reactive protection of the nation's people, economy, resources, infrastructure, communications, and technologies from terrorism. In our view, Homeland Security will require the comprehensive, coordinated efforts of all the levels of government, private industry, non-governmental organizations, and citizen groups. Now, this was our attempt at a definition, and if you've got feedback for us, we're obviously welcome to your feedback. Now, whenever you approach doing any type of research, you do have to have some framework that you put around it, or else you really don't get good results. So the first frame that we put around this was what were potentially the threat categories that we were dealing with. And to our knowledge, this is the most comprehensive threat matrix that we've seen. But again, this will continue to evolve because these are threats that we understand today. But the threat areas that we took into consideration as we went out to our survey and interview audience were the following: compromises to the integrity of our border, compromises to the integrity of our financial systems, threats to our physical infrastructure, threats to compromise our IT and communications backbones, obviously threats to our public health, threats to the integrity of our transportation system, threats to our natural resources, and weapons of mass destruction and disruption, and we had to throw that in there as a wild card. The rest are very clear. They have a clearly defined scope, but when you have WMD, it's kind of pervasive. Now, again, to frame research, we also had to come up with what we believed were at least solution areas that tended to span all of the threat areas. There are a few oddballs in here that don't, but many of these do. And this solutions list will continue to evolve. This solutions list is based on research again, but the key solution areas that we went out and tested were communications, health management, information assurance, integration, inventory management, physical security, a little bit of a wild card, but privacy and legal services to test the pulse on what folks are thinking out there. Response management, surveillance and intelligence, and then training and education. So what did we find? We found some pretty intriguing things, actually. The first thing we found, because again, we surveyed and interviewed public and private sector, is that the public sector has a set of immediate priorities as far as threat focus is concerned. And the private sector has their view on what is immediately important. Our survey and interview population came back and told us overwhelmingly the public sector is currently most worried about weapons of mass destruction, threats to our public health integrity, and threats to our physical infrastructure. Now, what that shows is a focus on the public. You know, it makes sense when you step back and you look at it that way. From a private sector standpoint, their biggest concerns were really focused around business continuity and supply chain management, managing the potential disruption to their supply chain. So the immediate concern is around IT communications and transportation, with WMD being important as well. Now, as you drill into this a little bit more closely, one of the things we asked them to do was to map the threat, the likelihood of the threat occurring versus the threat severity. And this is what we found. Basically, all the threats were considered to be somewhat likely. Weapons of mass destruction and threats to our natural resources were considered to be less likely to occur, but more severe. If you look at this chart as one of the famous Gartner quadrants, what it tends to tell us is that the areas where you'd be focused would be bio, transportation, infrastructure, and IT communications. So this is what our survey and interview population came back and told us. Clearly, they're concerned about the border integrity, but the actual severity of that threat they consider to be less. One of the things that we identified as a result of interviews, as a result of surveys, was that really there is a threat spectrum that we need to be thinking about as we develop solutions and develop strategies. Now, I will not tell you this is the perfect graphic. This graphic would be better if it was circular, and we know that, and we're working on fixing it. But if you look at it in terms of threat avoidance and then impact mitigation, you know, what the threat avoidance is all about is detection of a potentially new type of threat, prevention and preparing for that threat. And then impact mitigation really is about respond, recover, and then harden or deter. And so when we really think about it, when we are addressing new strategies, when we're addressing new solutions, we have to really think through the solution scope and the solution's position. Now, right now, if you look at where a lot of the responsiveness has been, what our survey and interview population told us is it's really been around the impact mitigation. We're now starting to see it move more towards the threat avoidance. But we have had traditional functions in place to deal with some of that threat avoidance. But clearly, where a lot of the solutions have also been focused recently is around pieces of the threat avoidance and pieces of the impact mitigation. This is an interesting chart. What this told us, we went out and we asked the public and the private sector, and we had surveys that were tailored, so we could tell who was a public and who was a public respondent, who was a private sector respondent. We asked them to come back and tell us, what are your priority solution areas today? And the darker blue bar is public sector. And so what you'll see is that their top 3 points of priority are around improving response management, improving communication and public awareness, and improving Homeland Security education and awareness. And again, that makes sense because where the focus right now is on the public. But when you look at that and then you compare it to the private sector, their top 3 focus areas, solution areas, are on enhancing surveillance and intelligence, improving security and protection, and facilitating an integration. I can tell you from personal experience with Deloitte Consulting, we have definitely had a focus on improving at least the tracking of each of our staff, because staff are our most critical resources. So when I look at our own behavior, it does emulate very much this chart. So it's just an intriguing chart. So what do we see going forward? I'm going to go through some numbers with you. But this was pretty intriguing. This is based on, again, a survey and interview and then research. So what we're seeing right now in fiscal year 02 and fiscal year 03 is really an immediacy focus. Organizations are really appear to be devoting the majority of the current Homeland Security funds to address the most pressing threats. And we see that. We certainly see that in the federal government, and we're seeing that in state and local. And we're seeing that to some degree in the private sector. We believe that, based on what we're seeing, that in fiscal year 04 there will be some degree of leveling. And I think we heard that confirmed, at least from what the Hill might be thinking as well. We think, based on what we're seeing and based on what the survey and interviews told us, is that there will be some consolidation that will start happening in maybe as early as fiscal year 04, but probably in fiscal year 05, and then some sense of convergence. If you look at it in terms of the number of point solutions that may be being implemented currently and long term, what we might need to do to reduce redundancy, that convergence would tend to make sense. Now, obviously, it's new. We're going to be tracking this, we're going to be monitoring this, but this is what early indications are telling us. We think that in fiscal year 05, with this convergence, there may very well be a renewed spending in the Homeland Security arena because some of the systems that may have been put in place might need to be modernized, if you would. Now, one of the things we did not do was try to put new numbers around federal. We just decided that there were enough people trying to do that, and there's enough flux around what's going on in federal today, that it didn't add a lot of value to focus on federal. Now we are going back because there are a number of areas where Homeland Security is repeated across government agency, but this study does not question the numbers from a federal perspective. What we did is based on what the survey and interviews told us. They came back and told us what they anticipated that they would be investing budget-wise in Homeland Security solutions specifically. For public sector companies, what we did was we extrapolated based on, I believe it was fiscal year 99 expenditures, what that might be for fiscal year 03, and we applied a 3% inflationary factor to that. So from a state government perspective, it appears that the low to high investment requirement will be between $5 billion and $10 billion. From a local government, this would be your municipal, county, et cetera, $9 billion to $20 billion. And then from a total private sector investment, this is based on GSA, and again, this was based on 2001 GSA spending of the Fortune 1000. $46 billion to $76 billion is the anticipated investment in Homeland Security solutions. So all told, without questioning the federal number, we're looking at between a $93 billion to $138 billion investment required to address Homeland Security based on what our surveys are telling us and based on what our interviews are telling us. And again, we shared with you that one of the things we asked for is what were your most pressing priorities. From a state government perspective, that really translates then to $1 billion to $2 billion being spent on health management, and we are indeed seeing that. About $800,000 to $1.7 billion in response management, and then another $700,000 to $1.4 billion in surveillance and intelligence. From a local government standpoint, and it's just intriguing when you look at it, but it does make sense. These are the first responders. Okay, so $2.6 billion to $5 billion in response management. Another $1.5 billion to $3 billion in security and protection. Again, makes sense. And then education and awareness, another $1 billion to $2.3 billion or so is what they're anticipating they'll be investing. Now, budgets will obviously have a lot to do with this, but this is the perceived level of investment that is needed. So if they could spend their operating budget on Homeland Security, what would they invest? This is what it tells us. Now, private sector, again, is very much focused on business continuity. So they're anticipating between $8 billion and $14 billion around being invested in the area of security and protection. Another $7 billion to $12 billion in surveillance and intelligence, and another 5.6 to 9.4 in facilitating integration. And again, things that make sense. They're focused on business continuity. They're focused on securing their supply chain, improving their overall ability to respond. Now, one of the intriguing things that we did was we asked, okay, what do you see in fiscal year 03, and then what do you see in fiscal year 04? From a public sector perspective, they really are looking at a fiscal year 03. If you look at the white area, that's greater than 5% of their operating budgets will be invested in Homeland Security. Okay. You see a fairly dramatic shift in fiscal year 04. Now, the overall maintenance dollars around Homeland Security aren't necessarily going to change that much, but that initial investment is really anticipated in fiscal year 03, at least based on what the survey and the interviews told us. So this is also part of what causes us to think that we're going to see a leveling in the market and then some sort of build out again. Now, private sector looks different. Private sector says fiscal year 03 is a big bump up, fiscal year 04 levels out, and then fiscal year 05 we're going to have to reinvest, is basically how we interpreted this chart. So if you look at it, 35% or so of the private sector respondents said that they were going to be investing greater than 5% in Homeland Security initiatives for their company in fiscal year 03. whereas that number drops to about 90% in fiscal year '04. This is an eye chart, and it's only designed to tell you, one of the things we did was we asked our survey population to try to give us an idea of what the average project might look like within each solution area. And this is the public sector view. Average project size is going to be about 500,000. Let me see here. Yeah, about 500,000 for the public sector. There is a range of $500,000 to $2 million, but what we're seeing is it appears that their average project size will be about 500,000. 8% said that they'd have a project somewhere in the $2 to $10 million range. Kind of what you'd expect. Again, I think how we interpreted this based on the survey population was we interpreted this as a quick wins type of focus. You know, let me go in and lock down this specific area. Now, another eye chart, but this is private sector. Private sector's 50% of the private sector respondents said that their average project size was going to be between 500,000 and 10 million. I know that's a very large range, but it gives you can get some sense. Information assurance actually is going to be between the 500,000 to $2 million range. That's a fairly significant area of focus for the private sector. And then if you look at the pink line, pretty bell-shaped curve looking, facilitating integration, that is in the 500,000 to 10 to $25 million range. So it gives you some sense of how companies are anticipating that they're going to respond to Homeland Security. Now, another question that we asked was who was best positioned to really help start addressing the issues of Homeland Security. And let me just build this out so that you can see all of them, because these are not in any specific order. First of all, aerospace and defense were considered to be key to helping address the solutions because they would help, or they were well equipped to address surveillance intelligence. They were well equipped to address security and protection, and they could help serve in the area of improving response management. And again, this is what our survey population and our interviewees told us. They also told us that systems integrators were well positioned to address the problem of facilitating integration. So they really were looking to them overwhelmingly to help in the area of facilitating integration, strengthening information assurance, improving response management. The media was considered to be critical to improving education and awareness, improving the overall delivery of communications and public alerts, and to help strengthen in the area of information assurance. Pretty overwhelming survey response in that arena. Security firms, obviously for their ability to reinforce security and protection, improve the overall capabilities in surveillance and intelligence, and improve response management. And then, last but not least, wireless/communications companies were considered to be crucial to improving communications and public alerts, strengthening information assurance, and enhancing surveillance and intelligence. The key, I think a couple of key notes we took away from this. This is not a federal government problem only. This is very much a public-private partnership type of problem. It's one that's going to require partnerships between federal, state, and local, and the private industry groups to really address long-standing solutions. Another key takeaway I think we had when we started looking at like the media and the wireless communications is that we learned a lot from 9/11. And that is that communications is key, consistent communications is key, and we do have a fairly strong backbone in place that we can pull on as a nation. So again, this is what our survey population is telling us, and we think they're good commentary. So, what does this mean as we start moving forward? Well, we asked this question too. We asked the question around what are the top barriers to really achieving success in the arena of Homeland Security. And there were three challenges that the survey and interview population came back with. The first was funding. Is there really going to be adequate funding to truly address the problem? And I'll show you another slide that gives you a little bit better perspective on that. But more than 50% of the respondents believe that funding, well, specifically the federal government, is not spending enough to counter threats. So that's 50% of the survey population shared that with us. And even government officials have expressed concern about how effectively money will be spent to achieve the maximum security return on investment. Federal policy was considered to be the next most substantial barrier, with 23% of the survey and interview population coming back and sharing with us that was going to be a key challenge. Organizational structure and politics were considered to be the numbers 3 and 4 tied barriers to success. Now, the greatest challenge when you look at those 4 items, those are certainly barriers, but another finding that we had as a result of our research is that you really do need, if you want to address this strategically, you really do need an enterprise approach to solutions and to the organization. You know, the department, or the announced Department of Homeland Security, certainly presents an enterprise approach to Homeland Security. There's a lot to be developed, but it is in line with what our survey population is telling us is needed to be done. This is a very intriguing chart. When we first went out with the survey, we weren't quite sure what answers we were going to get here. We felt we had a view, but if you look at it, basically with the exclusion of financial integrity, no solution area, or no threat area is considered to have adequate funding from a survey population and interview population. The biggest concerns are certainly around the area of public health and IT communications. That's where, and then the other is in the border integrity. There is a perception that there's considerable additional funding needed there. But across the board, with the exception of financial systems integrity, there's a significant gap between what the public and the private world perceive is needed to fund solutions for Homeland Security and where our current funding levels are. What we try to do whenever we do research of this type, and I will share with you, this is absolutely the most difficult research I personally have ever embarked on, and I think from a firm has to represent one of the biggest challenges as well. This is a market and an area of concern and focus that is developing more rapidly than just about anything we've seen before. One of the things that our survey population and our interview population came back and told us was planning for the future that you know is fine, and we should do that. But equally important, we should be planning for the future we don't know. And what this means is really, while you can certainly put in place policies around threats that have already happened or that we know could happen, you really need to design strategies to manage events, because you can't predict every potential threat that might come your way. It also implies that you should organize to manage the largest risks most effectively. From a solution provider perspective, it really, what it told us, and I'm sure it will continue to tell us more as we continue to work in this arena, but you need to develop solutions that are modular and that are compatible and that can adapt, because the whole issue of Homeland Security is an evolutionary issue. Threats will adapt, and therefore solutions will have to adapt as well. So that was lesson number 1. The second takeaway that we had from our survey and interview population was develop plans that address the entire threat spectrum. I know that you and I see a new solution for Homeland Security out there probably on a minute-by-minute basis almost now, certainly on a daily basis. But it's important to understand that there is a life cycle to each threat, which requires strategies and therefore solutions that are designed to address that entire spectrum. For organizations, it means you really need to, again, develop a strategy that addresses that entire threat spectrum, focusing on what your most critical assets and the most critical risks. And from a solution provider standpoint, it really means that you need to determine how existing products and services can combat the perceived threats and how to collaborate to make more comprehensive solutions available. It is a continuum, and it's a continuum where a single point solution will probably not be enough, and certainly a point solution at a point in time will need to become adaptive. A third lesson that we learned, I think is a good lesson, and we hear it, we're starting to hear this more and more. Strive for attainable security levels by balancing risk and protection. We have limited time, all of us. We have limited resources. We have limited budget. And so what we have to do is balance between the risk and the degree of attainable protection. For organizations, this really means that you want to prioritize your risks, concentrate on the critical assets, and determine how to measure the performance of a security program, because clearly it could become a question in others' minds as they're reviewing budgets going forward. From a solution provider standpoint, we believe this means that you should manage expectations related to the effectiveness of the security solution. There is no clear way to protect against every potential risk and every potential threat. So the best that we can do is position products that provide a balance and provide a balanced point of view. This was probably one of the most intriguing observations and learnings from our study, and we believe in it very much based on discussions we've had with others. But to solve this problem and to harden, if you would, the various aspects of our vulnerability today, cooperation is needed to achieve a new degree of innovation. Certainly cooperation will be needed to maximize the security value returned from investment in security solutions, and cooperation will be needed to minimize the complexity and the degree of redundancy of such solutions. Public and private partnerships are going to be needed to address integration issues and to develop the set of standards that we'll need to set or to really put solutions in place. If you think about it in terms of, again, all the point solutions, if we've not thought through the standards that we need, those point solutions could very easily become obsolete. For solution providers, what we learned was that we should collaborate to drive the essential standards for software and hardware. And what we were also told was that there is some merit to focus on commercial off-the-shelf solutions to reduce the implementation time. In fact, a good part of our survey population and interview population thought that was important. Speed's important. Another thing I want to share with you is one of the things we looked at, and obviously this will change, but we looked at the number of relationships that a public sector agency has to be involved with in case of a specific event. And there are 8 on average. Okay, so if a threat does occur, then 8 relationships I have to manage as a public sector agency. From a private sector standpoint, there are 5. So the degree of cooperation needed to manage that complex level of relationships is very high. With the announcement of the new Department of Homeland Security, certainly the degree of complexity. Finally, a key takeaway for us, and we heard it loud and clear from the survey population and from the interview population, a national strategy is needed. They went so far as to tell us that a framework a little deeper than just a strategy is needed to serve as a blueprint. We have a quote in the research study that pretty well sums it up, but one of the manufacturing vice presidents that we interviewed said, you know, everything's on hold until this national strategy is released. So for organizations, we believe that this means that you really want to develop a blueprint that focuses on the processes, the strategy, the organization, the information, and the technology that's needed to address the security solutions. For solution providers, we believe that this means that if there is really a larger blueprint that we need to plug and play into, that modularity is going to be important, and an open architecture to some degree is going to be important. There's a lot to be developed here, but this was a clear message that we received from our interview population. So, how do we translate this down into critical success factors going forward? We have three here for you to think about, and they are based on what our survey and interview population told us. But number one, and pretty overwhelmingly, integration of public and private efforts is critical to the success of Homeland Security. This was pretty well an overwhelming statement and an overwhelming critical success factor. Secondly, if you're going to formalize Homeland Security, create management structures that will really help facilitate response efforts. The degree of complexity that's in place today is pretty significant. And third, the more the various point solutions can converge, they will begin to yield more optimized results. Obviously, we're in an evolutionary period, but that's, you know, that is what we've learned from other technology evolutions. Now, I've left, obviously, my sponsor on here, Aviation Week, but a couple notes I want to share with you going forward. We are in the process of going through an update on the Homeland Security study. The study was released, as I shared with you, on June 6th. We are going to be updating it to include the President's, or the new Department of Homeland Security and the new strategy for Homeland Security. And then we'll have a better perspective on what the market's telling us. And just as an FYI, we're also going to be providing an update to the international community, who is very eager to understand what's going on. And we'll be doing that at the Farnborough Air Show in the last week of July, I believe it is. So with that, I hope we've addressed your desire here, Bill. And I don't know if you want me to try to take a question. Okay.
Questions for Linda?
No?
Guess she answered your questions. Thank you very much, Linda.
I think I screwed up your microphone.
Bill. Thank you very much, Linda, for your excellent presentation. We look forward to your future reports and future editions.
Thank you. I'll come back up for this.
Okay. Just a couple of announcements while our next session is about to begin. We'd like to welcome our live C-SPAN audience, and copies of this program will be available for purchase on the C-SPAN website shortly. C-SPAN viewers can also receive the latest information on Homeland Security financing by visiting our website, www.globalsecurity.bz. Winning federal contracts in the area of Homeland Security can be greatly enhanced by knowing the strategies and success stories of other firms. Here to moderate a corporate panel on how to win Homeland Security contracts is Andrew J. Sherman, an internationally recognized authority on the legal and strategic aspects of entrepreneurship and business growth. Mr. Sherman is a senior partner with McDermott, Will, and Emery, an international law firm with nearly 1,000 lawyers worldwide, where he manages a multi-million-dollar corporate and transactional practice representing Fortune 500 corporations, as well as hundreds of technology-driven and rapidly growing businesses and government contractors. His current and previous clients include Intel, Apple Computer, AOL, Texaco, Panasonic, Chevron Phillips, and many other major firms. He is the author of 11 books on business growth, capital formation, and the leveraging of intellectual property. He has appeared as a guest and commentator on all of the major television networks, as well as CNBC's Power Lunch, CNN's Day Watch, Bloomberg's Small Business Weekly, and National Public Radio. Mr. Sherman.
Thank you, Bill. First, thanks to Bill and his team at Equity International for pulling this important conference together, and to Linda for an excellent presentation. These are certainly big shoes to fill. Anytime you have this many smart people in a room that has no questions, that means you did a great job addressing whatever might have come up. In preparing some opening remarks to get started with our two great panelists, I kept trying to take a couple of different tacks, and then as I sat here and listened to Linda, I thought, well, I could shorten up my introductory comments just by saying, read Linda's report again. In trying to figure out how to win Homeland Security contracts, and we could probably spend till 4 o'clock if C-SPAN was willing to continue to roll tape and our panelists were willing to stay. I mean, it almost feels uncomfortable in a way to say, how do we translate all of this data, all of these unfortunate events into opportunities for our companies? And in the first month or two, my observation was people didn't even want to hold a conference like this. People didn't want to talk about how do we take an event as unfortunate as 9/11 and turn it into a business opportunity. That didn't sit right. It didn't feel right. And then as we digested this news, as we realized that we were in some ways inadequate in defending these threats, it became clear that many of the companies that you represent here in this room and many of the companies outside this room needed to be part of the solution. Linda kept referring to solution providers, and that's what I think we have to view ourselves as, not just in the spirit of building value for our shareholders, but in making all of us feel a bit safer. And that's why I think the room is filled without an open seat, not only because it's an important priority for our country, but because you are here, many of you wearing the hat of Director of Federal Government Sales or Marketing, the two gentlemen here, to try and figure out how can we bring the best technology to the marketplace, how do we create and play a key role in this market, and ultimately how do we make the country safer against these threats or react to them better. And so we've got a panel that's designed to focus on the federal contracting marketplace and the overall contracting marketplace. There's a couple of points that I gathered together that I just want to share with you and then really turn it over to them. I'm hoping that we have a more lively and active Q&A session because we've left plenty of time for it, and I suspect that with all of the great background and the comments that you've heard, we'll have some things to drill into. One of the things that I tried to do to, again, organize for this morning was what's clear to me from my vantage point and what's not. And unfortunately, the list of what's clear is a lot shorter than the list of what's not. What's clear to me, obviously, to restate that obvious point, is that the events of 9/11 have left a very permanent scar on all of us, that we realize that in order for us to feel safer and to be more secure, both as individuals, as citizens, as people with families, but also as people representing companies, that we need to build better solutions. And that's why I think all of you are here. Second, the enemy is unclear, it's elusive, it's well financed. I mean, if you put it in the context of whether military or business strategic planning, how do you compete with an enemy that you're not sure of? When you sit down to draft ordinary business plans or strategic plans or growth plans, you say, okay, I mean, this is business planning 101. Here are our 3 competitors, here are our 5 competitors, here are our 7 competitors. Here's what we know about them. In most cases, they're public. We can pull down reports off Edgar. We can learn all about them, and we can then position our companies to compete effectively. That's not the case here. That's not the case even at all. I mean, we're still trying to figure out who that enemy is and what their priorities are and where they might attack next.
And finally, that the technology and systems needed to fight this battle are still evolving, still being developed. They're obviously not perfect. In some cases, some of the hearings on the Hill have pointed out that they're less than perfect. And I think, again, that Linda's report, the overview, provided an excellent job saying where are improvements necessary? And as a result, as solution providers, where do opportunities exist? So what's not clear? Well, again, I could probably go on for 2 hours with this list, but let me just highlight a couple of things and then turn it over to our panel. First, what's hype and what's real? I mean, many companies, again, after we got through this 60 to 90 to 120-day digestion period of the news, by late into the fourth quarter and into the first quarter of this year, when we realized that a lot of work had to be done, there's still a lot of confusion about where are the real opportunities and where are opportunities that really aren't very real and certainly aren't very profitable, even if they present good social impact. Second, what's unclear, I hope very unclear, and very distant, is how imminent is the next threat? How will it come? Where will it come? Will it even be in this country? Will it be in another country? Certainly there are other democracies that are part of the enemy of these terrorist groups. We're pretty well convinced it'll be here, and I hope it's a long time away, and I hope it's of minimal impact. What new markets and business opportunities have been created? What of these opportunities will be dealt with by existing solution providers, and what's going to be literally new industries? I mean, in a way, a new industry has been created, although the key players, the players that are positioned, the one slide that I recall that Linda had up about the 5 industries that are best positioned to address these needs, these are industries that have been around for a long time. And so how do they evolve? And another slide that would be most interesting, but probably not a good one to include in any report, is the next slide, which is among those industries, which players are the best positioned to take advantage of those opportunities. That will be, again, an evolving and moving target. Another one, and one we want to address this morning, is who is the customer? Who is the customer? Is the customer, the obvious answer, the federal government? Everyone's running around thinking all the money's there. Well, the money is also, as Linda points out, in the state and local governments. The money is in private industry sectors. The money is in any place that has a public forum, from the owner of a mall, or 30 malls, or 50 malls, to stadiums, to wherever it may be. So when we say how to win Homeland Security contracts, I hope that you're already thinking that this customer that we're receiving the contract from, or the commitment from, is broader than the federal government, because it is much broader. And I think, again, not to harp too much on Linda's report here, but I think that it did a great job reinforcing that point. And how does your business models change? I mean, how do you sit down at the next board meeting or strategic plan meeting and say, well, geez, X% of our revenue came from these areas, but next year it could be X plus 1, plus 2, plus 3. How will we reposition the company, restaff the company? I hope that we're going to hear a little bit this morning, not just about how to win contracts, but how to change your companies in response to winning those contracts or competing after them in the first place. I have clients that had one person in Washington sitting as director of federal sales for the occasional federal sale. Well, that's not infrastructure, as I think you're going to hear, that's going to win many federal government contracts, or many contracts at all. But at the same time, do you swing the pendulum the other way, right? Do you suddenly send 100 people to Washington and declare them the director of federal sales? That's probably not a good strategy either. So where in between? How do you position? And as you see in another point that's unclear, who will these players be? I mean, there is definitely, those of you who have been in Washington more than about 2 months, know that there is an old guard. I won't name the old guard. You know who you are if you're here. But some companies are better positioned than others because they've been around and doing this for a long time. Maybe we didn't call it Homeland Security. Maybe we just called it defense or security. Now it has a new name. But these companies have been around for a long time, and if you're an early stage company, or even if you're a large stage company who's late to get into this game, what assurances, if any, do you have that you'll get your piece of the pie? You can, as you'll learn in the federal contracting process, you can't just wake up tomorrow and expect to be best friends with all the procurement officers around the Pentagon. It doesn't happen that way. There's a lot of golf and dinner and other things that get in the way of that take time to develop. Couple of last points that are unclear and hopefully will be more clear. How do the public and private equity markets respond to all of this? Is this viewed by the public markets as, some on Wall Street low margin business if you're dealing with the federal government, or has that changed? You know, does it automatically make your stock go from 10 to 40 because you announced that you've gone from one person in Washington to 30 and you're going to go after this large and elusive Homeland Security market? How will shareholders perceive it? How will investment bankers and others that influence Wall Street perceive it? And then drill down one step further to the private equity markets. How will they perceive it? You know, you don't, for those of you that are here from emerging growth companies, I know many of you are here from Fortune 1000, but those that are here from emerging growth companies, you can't necessarily saunter into a local venture capitalist office and say, oh, we're now doing Homeland Security, and expect that your business plan will be funded instantly. The venture capitalists are not that stupid. No, notwithstanding any current rumors, they are not going to just write a check because you say you're now doing Homeland Security. And how much of your business model needs to be adjusted to address that before you can make yourself attractive, either in the public or private equity markets? So there's a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, a lot for us to address, a lot that's been addressed, and that I hope that we'll get into more during Q&A. So those are my thoughts. I'm sorry that I hope that if I ever appear before all of you again, that my list of what's clear is a lot longer than my list of what's unclear. Let me have the pleasure of introducing the first speaker. I'm going to introduce Phil, hear Phil's comments, and then we'll introduce our second speaker, and then we'll have the Q&A, which I hope will be a very lively session. I've got about 4 to 5 pages on Phil's background, so I'm going to try and summarize it as best I can. Typically, sessions like this, you could spend the whole time just reading people's bios, and I thank you, Bill, for reading half of my page. Phil's Vice President of Government Sales for Sony Electronics, a small emerging growth company that some of you may have heard of, seeking private equity financing one day. The Sony Government Education Marketing and Sales Organization is dedicated to supporting the specific audiovisual and IT needs of the federal, state, and local institutions throughout the United States. I want to focus more on Phil than Sony because I know some of you have heard of the company. Phil's been there for 15 years as a veteran. He's held many sales and marketing positions, but primarily focused within Sony's government sales and marketing organization, joining in 1986 as a salesperson in the Midwest market. In 1992 was promoted to a regional manager for government and corporate sales in the Mid-Atlantic region, and has obviously worked his way up the ranks to his current position. He's worked for NCR and Lanier before that, and is a member of the board of directors of Washington Metro USO. Born in Chicago, graduated from University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh with a degree in marketing. Phil?
Well, thank you very much. I guess the question was answered with that kind of buildup. Who goes first? I would like to add one more thing to the list of what is clear. What is clear is if any of you who are out there who are new entering into the government sales or into the government marketplace think because there's all this money that's being allocated to Homeland Security that you're just going to be able to come in with a product and get some piece of that pie. There's no entitlements here. There's no entitlements here for new companies. There's no entitlements for small business, large business. There's no entitlements for any of us who have been around for a long time in this marketplace. You have to be there to get the business. And that is, Bill's asked me to participate with him before and some other people, and as I talk to different people around the country, that's the biggest message I could deliver. And for those of you who may have to answer to higher ups in your company and they say, hey, where's all this money? You know, we've given you all this resource. The reason is because everything you heard in the presentations this morning and in the study, everything's very general right now. Everything's at the 50,000 feet level. The real answer for the people who are going to be successful in this is not on how well you respond to a bid, because if that's your first entree to the customer, you're not going to win anyways. Okay, you have to be there for the small things as well as the large things. You have to, what we have learned, and the salespeople who work for me, why they're some of the best that I've ever met, is because it's hard differentiating them from the customer. They understand the business, they understand the needs and the requirements. Hopefully, we could take Linda's presentation and we could use that as a guideline and probably sit here for weeks and cover each paragraph in some detail at each chart. Without the time to do that, though, what we hope to see in future presentations and in future meetings like this is specifics. What is the application? Instead of being the 50,000-foot level presentation, what we hope to talk about here today is what are the specific applications? Today we're going to talk about border security. But what is that? There's 100, 1,000 applications within there. Where do each one of us play? The comment was just made about competition. There's no competitors here. We're all collaborating. We all collaborate with each other. If we don't collaborate with each other, there's no success for us as individual companies, as individual salespeople, and as a customer in the government, because no single company has a solution. That's been said a couple of times today, I believe, and we have to work together to get there. So it was very interesting today, listening to everything, and one of the reasons you see the politicians struggle is because they don't have the specifics. But the people that do have the specifics are your customers. Focus on what you're good at. That's what we try to do, is we focus on what we're good at. Every time we try and get out of the box at Sony and do something that we're not good at, we fail. Fortunately, with the brand reputation, it doesn't carry on and it doesn't impact us as negatively as it might some people who are singularly focused in what their companies do or what your companies do. I don't want to stand up here too long as an introduction, but that is the focus point of what I do at these kind of meetings and all day long, is sit with the customers, find out what their needs are, because if you're a student of history, you're going to find that Homeland Defense, Homeland Security is not new. It's just got an invigoration as a result of September 11th. Going back to the founding fathers, I mean, one of the biggest concerns when you study history is how do they secure the homeland? Just a different set of enemies and a different set of concerns. So with that said, I'll turn it over to my counterpart here. Thanks.
As you can see, we're strategically leaving time for the maximum amount of questions and answers, so please be getting those ready. I next want to introduce Scott Merriman. Scott is the manager of Motorola's Federal Government Integrated Solutions Division, another small early-stage company you may have heard of. Scott has 26 years of communications experience in the federal government marketplace. He spent 14 years first as an Army soldier and then as civilian division chief for the Army's Information Systems Command, providing communications support to the intelligence community. He joined Motorola in 1991, initially in a sales and marketing role, and then became director of federal sales for Motorola's Internet and Networking Division. Most recently, he's accepted a position as manager of Motorola's Federal Government Integrated Solutions Division, providing wireline and wireless interoperable systems to federal government customers. Scott?
Good morning. It's interesting from a Motorola perspective and from a Homeland Defense perspective. We've taken a bit of a different approach, and I guess the approach that it's in place for us is that the federal government dollars that are out there right now are what are out there right now. Homeland Defense and new money that's going to be associated with Homeland Defense is going to be 03, 04, and 05. The money that's in place and it's there now is against existing contracts. And when you have existing contracts and you have customers with existing contracts, they're taking those initiatives that are now new initiatives for Homeland Defense and they're applying them to existing budgets and existing contracts. Customs modernization, a 10-year contract, that's a $10 billion contract that's out there. That is now going to be and is being applied against the Homeland Defense and Homeland Security initiative. You have new contracts in place with INS. You have contracts, the new contracts awarded for TSA. So, and of all the agencies, TSA is the only new agency with new money that is now being established. Everyone else has an established budget. So, friends of mine within the government who I've worked a good deal of time with, they have a motto that they use with us and any vendor. They say that they'd like to have one neck to choke. When it comes to providing a solution, they want one neck to choke. We talked a little bit here about doing partnerships and collaborations. Well, you won't find large contracts with one vendor on them anymore. There is no one vendor contract anymore. You've got teams of the biggest and brightest and best, and they're tiered at level 1 and level 2 and level 3 to imply and to include the small companies, small disadvantaged businesses, to bring in that expertise and that new capabilities that they may have with their special and unique things. But there is no one contractor who's awarded a contract. Although you may have your name at the top of that list, and you may be the government's one neck to choke, you're in charge of a group of people that are out providing a new solution. As part of Homeland Defense and Security, what we're also looking at is that as folks' missions change, and you look for those existing contract vehicles, is there technology substitution clauses that are on there that will allow you to give a new solution, a new application for that new customer or these new requirements? And if there is there flexibility of the scope, and contractors are working harder from a government perspective to allow a broader scope, to allow you to give those kind of solutions for the customer and what a customer may require. So if you've got new solutions, and for new companies that are not on those existing contracts, take those solutions to your customer, who is the end user customer, and then take it to the vendor community as far as those systems integrators who say, this is a solution that your customer and my customer want. I may have the contract vehicle. We kind of run against a little bit of what we call a 4-point model that says, if you've got an application and a solution, that's nice. But if you haven't got a contract vehicle, what you've got is a pipe dream. So without that contract vehicle, there is no application solution. It's just a nice to have. I can't get to it. It's too hard to procure. And with that, then the items 3 and 4 of that solution are you have to have a statement of work that's real for both you as a vendor and as the customer, and you also have to have a bill of material so the customer actually gets what it is that you've promised them against that solution. So we're looking at working towards those new budgets as new budgets come available against new projects and against new contract vehicles. But we're concentrating on those that are in hand, those that are out there, that contractors are in place, that are willing to look at new solutions against customers who have new requirements. And with that, I'll turn it over to folks from your description for your panel.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I've got a few of my own, but I'd like to yield to the audience first. And my job will be repeating the question for our C-SPAN listeners and then turning it over to whichever or both of the panelists that's most appropriate. So who wants to break the ice? I gave you your homework assignments a good 15, 20 minutes ago. Well, let me just start with a broad one, and then hopefully that will trigger some additional Q&A. How has 9/11 changed the procurement process from your perspective? Do you see more tentativeness among the procurement officers? Do you see more confusion? Do you see more opportunity and excitement? Where do you see the impact on the procurement officer? And I guess this would be appropriate for both of you.
As a result of 9/11, there's a sense of urgency, depending on what the procurement is for. If it's tied directly to a security need for the FBI or a DOD event, the procurement is very, very fast. In fact, one thing that hasn't been mentioned here is the government credit card or the government impact card. It's generally was put in place for procurements that were going to be $2,500 or less. I could tell you that some of those cards have some very large credit lines available per purchase, and in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, depending on who the agency is or what that person's level is, that we at Sony have been part of for immediate needs for the war effort. So the procurement process in that way has changed. You've never seen that kind of level on the impact cards. And the other side, on the negative side, it has slowed down some other areas. If it doesn't have the requirement, the immediate, if you will, even political requirement, it sounds harsh, but it is reality, it gets put on the back burner. And that does impact some other applications, whether it's for a health services application or something that's important to somebody else, but not necessarily is politically prevalent today. It gets kind of slowed down with other procurements in front of it. That's what I've seen.
I've seen where a contract has a requirement for you to deliver in 180 days, receiving an order, and you know it's in in response to a 9/11, that 180 days becomes 22, becomes 14, and not because the contractor or the customer has asked that, because the folks that are internal to the factory know what it's for, and orders get realigned and prioritized, not as if a DPAS system was in place, but a bigger system than a DPAS was put in place that says this is the right thing to do to get it out to support what needs to be supported now. But in conjunction with what Phil said, the other response is that where you had non-contractual things in place that said, how do you do interoperability between organizations, this organization and that? It absolutely has slowed that down, because the questions, there's a bigger stake now. It's not just my backyard that I'm trying to integrate. That integration means across multiple agencies, and there has been some cautiousness about how quickly you go forward with that.
There definitely has been a lot of, or at least a fair bit of press coverage on how the sense of urgency has created a negative impact on some non-Homeland Security defense priorities, and how those have moved way down the list over those that offer a solution. But let's focus on that sense of urgency just for a second. Is that, maybe we can explore the costs and benefits of that a bit further. I would imagine that one cost is that details could be missed, that in our rush to provide a solution that we're not really thinking through issues. A second potential challenge in a sense of urgency is that there might be a tendency, either due to familiarity or even laziness, to go with an existing relationship rather than entertain a new one if there's a sense of urgency to get things done quickly. Would that exclude a newer player to the market and give preference to an older one, notwithstanding your thoughts about there are no entitlements? Can we talk about that sense of urgency a bit more?
The best way to, you're right, it is because you're there that you have that edge. As far as the details being missed because things are being rushed into, I think if anything, it may be a little bit of the opposite side. The field agent, the end user, the person on the front line, that's where sales and our customers have something very much in common. We're all required to be successful all of the time, every day, and there's immediacy in what we all have to do. And as we all know, as you start going further and further up the line, that those people have much broader responsibilities, and they have to temper everything. So when somebody comes to you now and they say, we need this taken care of, guess what? They really don't know how to do it. So all this, from our customer standpoint, for everything they've been asking for a very long time, now they're getting. And the details are in place because the details have been in place for a very, very long time. So it's really a plus. And how does that impact the newcomer? It's pretty tough on a newcomer. And that's why I keep telling everybody that you have to go out and show your potential customers, your prospects, what you have to offer. Because you're a newcomer, it doesn't exclude you. If they don't know who you are, then it does exclude you. You exclude yourself, and it's as simple as that. So you can have all the R&D in the world and everything else, but you have to talk to somebody. So that's what I found.
Good points. Scott, thoughts on that?
We found that when you have new companies that have new solutions, there's smart people out there in the small business and the 8A world that know who has contract vehicles with which customers, and they have a sense that says, if I have a solution and a new solution, and there is an existing contract vehicle that's there, they'll come find, if it's a Motorola or if it's a Sony, that says, here's a solution that may be applicable to this customer and may be applicable to the system that you have and the contract to have. And I think that new ideas are coming in that way because the customers realize that they need new solutions that maybe not a traditional would have, but I believe with the contract vehicles in place that you've got people coming to you that you can go ahead and present those solutions. And the possibility, as I said, with the technology substitutions where you're adding new technologies and scope of contract, you have the ability to add those different contracts for those different solutions.
If I could add something to this, one thing that wasn't talked about today as of yet, now it will be, is the incremental difference. As I stated earlier, Homeland Security has been out there for a very long time, and many of the people in this room have been working in it even longer than I have and are much better at it. The reality is that those are the people that are going to be the leaders in this moving forward. And so what are they doing today? what is required? What is that incremental difference? What is your product? What is our product at Sony, Motorola? What do they offer to help enhance that end user? And that's the biggest way to get your products in. That's the biggest way to help the customer right now, because, there is no off season when it comes to worrying about terrorism. They're not just sitting back there and saying, wait, new plans, new game plans. It's the summer break here before preseason starts. There's no warm-ups to see what works and doesn't work. So you have to work with what you have, and you have to do what we call value-added upgrades, enhancements to the contract. So go to the companies, a lot of them are on the list in this room, and say, you're very good in this particular area. Here's what we have to offer that may be able to enhance in that, or what do you need? Maybe we could help develop that product for. And that's what the government wants us to do. That's exactly what they want us to do. If you're new and, or even if you're old and you haven't done it before, when you ask the government person, what do you need? Lots of times they'll send you to their contractor.
I think you're raising an excellent point. I think the takeaway, or one of the takeaways from this series of comments to either larger or emerging growth companies, both here in the room or watching on C-SPAN, is that if you have applications or technologies or capabilities or experience that are going to be relevant to this solution, to re-examine those, but don't take your time doing so. You don't have a lot of time in a rapidly moving marketplace where the contracting officer has a sense of urgency. You're going to have to bring these technologies forward to this potential customer pretty quickly, and if you can't get directly to the contracting officer, again, picking up on the spirit of collaboration and cooperation, bring it to your potential partner's attention. There's a question? Yes.
Steve Corm at the University of Texas. With regard to the last point, it would strike me there would be a new opportunity for universities in the private sector to do cooperative elements. For the simple reason, universities have very large research capabilities at the University of Texas, for example, very low costs for the industry, very long traditional relationships with the Defense Department, for example, the University of Texas, and we could transition many of our technologies to the private sector and then to the government user. And I haven't heard that discussed, but I think it's a reality in today's market.
Yeah, let me, again, just to repeat kind of the point, more of a point than a question, and a very important point, again, for our C-SPAN viewers, is the important role that universities will play. Just as Linda discussed the role of private and public partnerships, we begin immediately thinking of corporations and government. There's a third and fourth and probably fifth player out there, and probably the most important third player are the universities. So much research is going on, so much research has been going on, and some of the research that's been happening may not have been originally intended to have a Homeland Security application, but has obvious benefits or being part of the solutions. And the more of that we can bring out of the universities, the good news is some of that's already paid for, it's funded, it's just a matter of finding that application. And I think that there are both large corporations and small that would love to be the partner and the marketing vehicle onto the federal, state, or local government with those technologies. So thank you very much. It's very important to keep that player kind of up there on the screen and keep them in mind. Yes?
My name is Jason Nelson. I'm with BioScript, and with emerging technologies such as biometrics in the market, do you see, well, we see a lot of testing within different divisions of the airports, within different airports among them, different Federal Reserve banks. Do you see a consolidation of the testing sites and more of an overall direction with the Institute or the Department of Homeland Security or with the TSA? Do you see them kind of taking over that role and kind of giving the results and the suggestions to their respective companies?
The question again is the very quickly evolving biometrics industry, its applicability to Homeland Security, particularly in the area of banks and airports and other important public facilities, and do we see a convergence on the horizon either very shortly or over the medium term? Anyone with thoughts on that issue? And again, as we pose a question like this, if you have either a question or an answer from the audience, we're taking those as well, so please feel free to jump in.
One of the areas in biometrics, biometrics is definitely the hot topic. It is definitely so far the buzzword of this year, or the buzz application, but it's a perfect opportunity for collaboration because the biometrics is the piece in the middle, right? You have to have some way to get the information into it, The biometrics does the analyzation. Then you have to have some way to store it. You have to have some way to analyze it further. Then you have to have some way to share it, communicate it, and everything else. So once again, it's another one of those, maybe not 50,000 feet levels, but 25,000 feet, where there's a lot of people that are entering into it with a lot of different levels of sophistication. And it's really up to the systems integrators, if you will, of the world, to see how that incorporates in with the overall solution and where is the ultimate benefit. As you've been able to see, it's got different levels of success depending on how it's being used. One of the airports down south just decided the technology is not ready yet, and others types of applications are using it very, very well. In other words, the stadium application, where you're looking at broad groups of people, has limited success, a lot of error rate and everything else like that, but more of the door entry type area, spot things, very, very successful in that particular area. So once again, it's what is the application? That is always the question. The answer that we learn working with the end users, it's not, the technology is not the answer. The answer is what is the solution to the application and how are you going to get there? And biometrics is one of those tools that's going to be there. But what is biometrics? Is it going to be facial recognition? Is it going to be retina recognition? Is it going to be fingerprint recognition? Is it going to be a combination of all of the above? So, and working with universities and everything else, there's where a lot of development's going on.
That was kind of more my question was, do you see the TSA or the Department of Homeland Security consolidating the testing and evaluation for the government entities and doing that at one site as opposed to having testing done throughout all of the facilities around the country? We're seeing testing, we have products everywhere, and I'm wondering if you see a consolidation and a direction from them.
If you're waiting for the Department of Homeland Security, you're going to be out of money or out of time because it's not even in place. And the reality is that the president appointed a board, but there's no bodies there yet to evaluate technology. They don't have time. They're basically a communications agency right now. And so you really need to get in with the FBI, the CIA, National Security Agency, all of the top systems integrators in the country. And that's the place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think to build on that, the short answer to your question is yes. and the unfortunate longer answer is, but no one knows where or how or the details. I think another important point, and it comes up in this issue of balance that was discussed, is what are we as consumers and citizens willing to tolerate? I mean, how many of us, you don't have to raise your hands, as strongly as you feel both morally and as business people about this issue of Homeland Security, how many of you are upset when you're pulled out of line for that extra inspection right before boarding? I mean, I fly 2 to 3 times a week and I hate it. And no matter how dedicated I am to Homeland Security, I still bitch and moan to myself about getting those extra set of bags going through and missing out on the carry-on luggage space that would have been there if I had gotten on sooner. Same thing here. I mean, the longer it takes to get through those things, the longer the line going into the stadium or the mall or the public facility. The solution isn't just about the technology, but its impact on us as consumers and citizens, and how much are we all willing to tolerate. Other questions from the audience? I've got a few more. Yes.
Yes, I'd like your perspective, considering the sense of urgency that you've been talking about and the short time available for R&D and the lack of many technology products in several of these areas, what is your perspective on the reception toward foreign technology products from countries that may have had a little bit longer experience with threats to the homeland and terrorism and things of that nature, products that might be available from East Europe, Africa, the Middle East, places of this nature?
Good question. Again, just to reiterate the question, what is the receptiveness or openness of these various types of customers to technologies or solutions coming in from abroad, particularly where those countries or companies situated in those countries have more experience in dealing with these issues than we do? What have you guys experienced?
The federal government's restrictions based on the federal acquisition regulations that says how much content, how much foreign content, and the Buy America and Trade Agreement Acts, those particular type of rules and regulations are in there specifically to protect mission critical and mission critical type systems. The products and solutions that are coming from outside foreign countries that would possibly have a homeland defense spend, and maybe that's something that needs to be looked at from a products perspective. It says, what is the risk? What is the associated risk between how much they give us or gain from a technology perspective versus what kind of risk we would have to do from a technological and a vulnerability system. I don't think that there's a short answer for that. I think that security systems and measures from a communications perspective allow communication security through devices like that, but the inherent device or inherent technology, it's going to have to be evaluated, and there's going to have to be some tough choices made on real reward versus risk assessment.
You probably just gave Equity International the topic for their next seminar on policy related to Homeland Security. But I could tell you from being a Japanese company with the majority of our products being made overseas that there is plenty of ways to sell those products and solutions in. But once again, you have to be careful not to confuse products with solutions. Many products come from overseas and are integrated here. Some are integrated over in other countries. I think your question is, how do you propose solutions that are working overseas, whether it be in Israel or someplace else where we're faced with this kind of situation every day? And that's probably a question for somebody else other than me.
I think there's a related point to build on, just to reinforce something that we've been trying to get across all morning, and that is, if you're going to make the federal government your target, then obviously the FARs and other types of contracting guidelines are going to be applicable if you're a company that's situated overseas. But there are many, many customers in this market. If I am a private commercial real estate developer and own 40 malls and would like to make sure those malls are secure as possible, I'm much more likely to be interested in the very best suite of products and services and solutions, whether that company is based in Israel or Western Europe or in the United States, because that's my contracting guideline, is to find the best and most efficient solution. If you're going to be selling into the federal government, you're going to have to deal with those regulations, DoD guidelines, et cetera. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
The public-private collaboration seems to be could be a problem here in the near future. The federal government is now starting to impose greater security checks and clearance of personnel, and we've started to see this in our contracting activities, that agencies such as EPA is placing requirements for secret clearances on their contracts. This is starting to restrict some forms of competition. And as we move down into the local governments, we're starting to see that my company is in a position of training and first responder work, and there's 2.5 million people that need to get first responder training. How they're going to get that training with the imposition of potential security clearances on the training personnel is a problem. I know you're dealing in products and some professional services, but the service industry is where I see that some big problems are going to be coming, especially with the budget and the amounts of money that are going into this market in the next couple of years. It's like $83 billion. Where are these professional people going to come, and how are we going to vet them?
I think there were, it's an excellent point. Let me try and summarize it as best I can. I think there were two components to your point/question, and that is, number one, what impact in general will the need for security clearances, special certifications, trainings, all of these more advanced types of clearances or certifications impact the overall contracting process? And then the second related point, which goes to the issue we've been dwelling on this morning about the importance of collaboration and teaming and partnerships, how will the need for these certifications and clearances impact your ability to partner? And I think that, again, to build on that a little bit, relevant both to the Davids trying to partner with Davids, the Goliaths trying to partner with Goliaths, but most importantly, or at least among the top priorities, trying to get a Goliath who's seeking a David to partner with, but that David-sized company may not have those clearances. So it's the kind of, I'd really like to do business with you and bring you into a piece of this contract, but you just don't have the clearances, nor is there the time under this sense of urgency to get them. Is that a fair restatement?
David and Goliath is in the perspective to the opportunity. You're the Goliath if you're the person putting the entire solution together and the prime contractor and going after the whole ball of wax. You're the David if you're one of the subcontractors who are trying to get your piece in there. But you could completely reverse roles depending on the next application. At Sony, nobody I'm aware of has security clearance. We've been selling to the federal government, national security agencies, Department of Defense in all different areas, the FBI, CIA for a large number of years into some very secretive applications. And so the first thing to do is to change it from a problem to a challenge, and then to an opportunity, and how you do that. And how do we do that is, once again, it's in the area of collaboration. If it doesn't require security clearance to present your solution or what you think is a solution to somebody. Anybody can listen to you. They just can't tell you things. Okay? So if you require, and in many cases, in almost all cases you do, to ask questions to gather more information or to further develop your solution, then you need to get a intermediary or a moderator or somebody in there. And many times in this forum that we're talking about today in the area of technology, whether it's services or hardware and software, you get with the integrators who have those clearances, who have those relationships. And that's where you talk to them. You say, look, we have something that we think is going to work here, and it's going to work very well from everything that I know, and we'd like to show it to you, simplifying the process a great deal. And you start there. But even at the government end user, they're very, very interested in finding more ways to talk to you. In fact, I could tell you from firsthand experience from talking to somebody inside the White House that the last thing they want to do is make it difficult for anybody to bring ideas in. They're trying to find new ways to open it up. So, yeah, there's going to be some newer areas of where security clearances are required, but don't ever let that stop you. Just ask the person who you want to talk to, what is the best way to get this information to you? And they may say, go talk to our contractor. Or what have you got? And they may talk to you and listen and ask you the questions.
Thank you. Art.
With regard to that, again, the universities can play a major role. The University of Texas, for instance, has university-affiliated research centers which work directly with the military, and these centers can then serve as the intermediary between the private sector or other entities that wish to have secure work done, and with the university, which does excellent training. That's what we're here for, after all, and with the military who needs that work.
The point being made, and really more of, I think, part of the answer than a question about the role of universities in helping to solve the problem that's been posed about certifications, security clearances. Clearly, the partnerships that have been referred to all morning are not just going to be two-party partnerships. They may be 3-, 4-, and 5-party partnerships, and I think it's important as a takeaway for today to include the universities and the potential role of the universities as being part of that solution. One question that I'd like to throw out before we wrap up, and hopefully there's 1 or 2 more questions left in the audience, because I think it impacts many of you in this room, and that is from a strategic planning or resources perspective. This is almost kind of a personal question within your companies. Have you found that the two of you have played kind of a renewed role and importance? Are you suddenly more in the limelight or under the radar screen than you had been before in a post-9/11 environment, as more and more large companies as well as small ones begin to really gear up for being part of that Homeland Security solution? I would expect that your role and importance within the company, the kinds of resources that might be made available to you and to many of you in this room, may be evolving and changing.
I'll take a hack at this. The roles have changed, but it's because of the budget and where budget cycles are, and because of customer relationships. You now have folks internal to already established teams that are going to become more of a part of your Homeland Defense team as a minority player, because this group now has a new function within Homeland Security. So you have an emphasis and you have a team that goes after from a business perspective and looking at it, but you have almost every player within your federal government sales and marketing organization that now is somehow touching, and it's not just federal but state and local, that's touching a Homeland Security, Homeland Defense type initiative. So the emphasis has both become pinpointed to a group that says this is what we're going after, but it's gotten very difficult because you're just like the federal government, who has a multitude of agencies that are now going to come into one. You have a multitude of groups from a federal and from a state perspective that are now trying to coordinate efforts where before you were a state business, you were a federal business, or you're an education business, and you could keep those separate. Now they're all kind of bleeding together, and you have to make some hard decisions about how much emphasis against your day-to-day business versus how much emphasis from a tracking it and moving forward and doing the right things from partnering. So it's a difficult process to keep resources in place to attack it and still meet your requirements of your bottom line, because you've got day-to-day business to do.
Right. It's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of focus and a lot of exposure on the government sales organization, government marketing organization inside Sony right now. And the good news in that is that we get resources a lot faster than we ever had before. And everybody wants to participate. Everybody in this, I can tell you, in Sony worldwide is very interested on being on the right side of this effort and wants to participate, and is always looking for ways to participate as a company, and I can tell you as individuals. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the turnout after September 11th and what everybody did personally. And it's with time sacrifice and financial and everything else to do what was necessary. The negative side of this is that there's also an unreal expectation sometimes of what you should expect. That because there was $40 billion thrown at it, that we should get, somebody actually once said that we should get at least 2% of that. And I said, well, I'll go for 1. But, you know, the reality is what is that $40 billion going to buy? Or as we heard today, what is that $9 billion going to buy? And as you heard today, on the IT side, you were even a little bit further disappointed. So the answer is because there's no specifics. So the business is going to be on capturing what you've been trying to capture for a very long time, that now not only does corporations, is there a heightened interest on the government side of the business, but inside the government itself, senior members of government and in politics are now more interested in what field level people are doing than they ever were before, and they're trying to learn real fast. So that's the answer.
I really wanted to make sure that we covered this before we were wrapped up, because I know that many of you, both in this room and that are watching, are wearing the exact same hat as these two gentlemen and are probably under a lot of new pressures, a lot of new limelight that you might not have been under before. I've heard clients and people in similar positions tell me that, you know, a couple of years ago we were at least lower person on the totem pole, maybe not lowest, and all of a sudden we're the highest priority, and everybody wants to know what we're doing and when we're doing it and what resources can we throw at it, and that creates a real management challenge. I think that the comment that was just made by Phil is very insightful. You know, it's a two-edged sword. I love the attention, but I don't like the unrealistic expectations that are now being placed on me and my department. Yes, I can get resources upon a single email, but then what do I do with those resources, and what are the expectations of the president of the company or the board of directors or the shareholders of the company or Wall Street about the allocation of those resources, and how quickly we'll be able to show general returns on those kinds of investments. Those are real issues that I know that many of you challenge. And again, in the spirit of creating new topics for future programming for Equity International, maybe that's one right after the impact of the foreign contractor, is to really understand how within companies the impact has been from a resource management and goal setting and other types of expectations. Do we have any last questions? We've got about another couple of minutes. If we don't have any more questions, I'm going to ask, oh, I'm sorry, one more question there.
Just to follow along on the David and Goliath analogy there, maybe the two Goliaths on the panel could talk a little bit about where in their organizations David should go to try to talk about technologies or solutions that they may be able to add to yours.
Again, to repeat the question, I think it's a great one to end on in the spirit of partnering and all of us joining together to be part of the solution. What tips might these two Goliaths have for some of the Davids that are in the audience or Davids who are watching who'd like to partner with the Goliaths in going after some of these new contracting opportunities?
The hardest question of the day.
Well, I would say that right now, not being in position to name somebody, I'd name myself, that says that if there's a new group or a new company that has a solution The Motorola is constantly looking to partner with new solutions and new companies that I said earlier that one neck to choke. Well, in this case, it may be mine. That I would take those initial calls, and we would make sure then that we would get them to the right group, because we're a very large company with an awful lot of interest, and I would take that and see that we could get it in the right hands.
I would give the exact same answer, different phone number. And on the other side of it, though, at Sony too, remember I said you're on both sides of this, and as a large company with a lot of products, we're always looking for all of you to partner with too, because you have the solutions and we have the goes intos and comes outos, if you will, to get the information in and get it out. So it works both ways.
One thing I wouldn't do is get discouraged. I see too many CEOs of David's looking at the overall process, looking at the red tape or potential red tape involved in partnering with a Goliath and saying, wow, this is just too much bureaucracy for us, so we're not even going to try. I mean, I think we've learned this morning that there's enough of a pie out there that it's at least worth the effort. There's no guarantee on results, but it's certainly worth the effort. Well, I'd like to ask each panelist to just maybe give us 30 seconds to a minute of closing remarks or parting advice. I'll take a stab at wrapping up, and then I'll turn it back over to Bill.
By default, I got to go first. From my perspective, I think that the Homeland Defense and Homeland Security that we, Motorola as a corporation, are going after because it's the right thing to do. It's the right business to be in. We recognize that it's going to be fraught with both peril and with reward, both from a corporation and from the number of people whose number of hours that put in to make these solutions for customers who are in real-world situations and need real-world solutions. So we're looking forward to the challenge of working with the folks that are in this room and others to put forward solutions to make a best solution, and we're looking to partner with those companies that are already in place that have solutions that we can bring a value add to and bring our partners with us on that value add.
I would like to thank everybody, and I'd like to say be careful not to get caught up in the hype. The hype's going to waste a lot of time, and it's going to waste a lot of money. I've already wasted a lot of time and hype for all of you. Get it down to the specifics. What do you do? Where are you good at? And go find those customers. And more likely than in years past, the funding will be there for a security type of application. But I'd just suggest stay with your strengths and find a customer.
Thank you. I think we've instituted a 10 compliment maximum, so I'm going to give Linda her last compliment on her presentation and refer you in wrapping this up to a chart that breaks out the Homeland Security market into a series of important strategic steps: detect, prevent, prepare, event, respond, recover, and deter. And like any good company, whether you're large or small, no matter what role you play, you have to figure out where do you fit into that box. I hear lots of companies, large and small, saying we want to be part of the solution. But then they don't drill down and say, well, what part of the solution? Which part? Where do you have capabilities, experience, and technologies that will help solve one of those boxes? And to stay focused. I mean, the best way to land your fair share of these contracts is to figure out which one of those boxes you fall into and how do you provide the best solution, product, or service into that box. So thank you, all of you, for your great input, the answers, the questions and the answers, and we wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
To thank Andrew, Phil, and Scott for this excellent session on how to win Homeland Security contracts. And I'd like to thank all of our very informative speakers today for their outstanding presentations. The value of this briefing is also the understanding of and introductions to other companies with an interest in providing Homeland Security products and services. The final session of this briefing is an opportunity for several corporate guests to introduce themselves, explain how you want to work with the federal government, and what kind of relationships you want to establish with other members of the corporate sector. To begin, it is my pleasure to let you know that the organizer of today's briefing, Equity International, is a business development firm established in 1995. We are leaders in facilitating the involvement of the corporate sector in global relief and reconstruction, in worldwide technology expansion and financing, and in homeland and global security. In 1998, we organized a briefing for corporate security directors on the threat of Osama bin Laden to U.S. facilities and personnel overseas. In 1999, the President's counterterrorism director, Richard Clark, keynoted our cyber terrorism conference. And in March of this year, we hosted the Global Security and Disaster Response Summit, featuring the latest information on programs and financing for Homeland and Global Security and Afghanistan reconstruction, and attended by over 700 corporate and government leaders. We invite you to our next Homeland Security financing briefing here at the National Press Club on July 29th, and we invite you to monitor the latest news on Homeland Security by attending our online Center for Homeland and Global Security, www.globalsecurity.bz. Now I'd like to introduce several of our corporate guests to make a few closing comments. First, I'd like to introduce Ray Donahue, who's Director of Antion Corporation. And if you could come up here to the podium, that would be great. This one.
Morning, I'm Ray Donahue, Director of Homeland Security for the Antion Corporation. We've been a privately held concern in Northern Virginia for a number of years, headquartered in Northern Virginia. We recently went public in March, and so we're adapting to all of those items as well as new and emerging markets. We agree very much with what we've seen here. There is no one company with a be-all or end-all solution, and teaming and partners have been where we have been in our business from the beginning. We have been members of the team. We have been a lead. And so we can be a prime or we can be a partner, as many of the other folks have already discussed. We took a look at Homeland Security in terms of our strengths, which we also agree with, is assessing where you are and what you've done. We've done a number of things for the Department of Defense, which has been our predominant customer over the years. And we have found some things that we think have applicability to the Homeland Security market, and we have focused on those types of events, which again reinforces comments previously made. We have strengths in assessments and studies and modeling and simulation that we have developed with the Department of Defense, Department of the Army over a number of years. We have a number of solutions in the critical infrastructure protection arena that we think are particularly interesting. And we've been a systems integrator by trade. And we have a logistics background that leads us to a number of solutions in commodity controls and some of those areas that we think are predominant. For example, we do the cargo management system for the United States Air Force, which also has an interface to the commercial industries that are in the cargo movement business. And so from a tracking and security perspective, we think that that potentially has applications in a Homeland Security market as we go forward. We've been on the ground floor of smart cards, then called Central Access Cards or CAC cards with the Department of the Navy, and developing that from the beginning. And we've recently won a contract for applications with biometrics for the state of Pennsylvania to introduce some of those technologies. Our joint logistics for the Warfighter Initiative has taken traditionally old databases from the Army and the Marine Corps and found a way with middleware to get those to talk to each other, not changing the existing databases and finding source data, but finding a product that allows you to mine resources in both areas. And in the data mining arenas, we think that there are so many databases out there that no one is going to build a new one-size-fits-all database. It will be too expensive and too long in coming. And we think that people who can do middleware applications and solutions, who can data mine existing data, pull it together to remove latency, have products that would be of interest. We've been in the intelligence field for a while. We can't really talk about some of those systems, but derived from some of those technologies, we've developed an information exchange system that is secure but not classified. As a potential application for first responders, once the federal, state, local information sharing regime is established and defined, we think that there's a potential there for doing that. And then using that as an integrator piece, we're looking at front-end applications, which we also have a market in. Video down to PDAs, badge camera technologies. Also taking a look in the areas of chem biodetector front ends and the ability that once you've alerted to a signal, what do you do with it? Do you take it into this secure system and share it to first responders, trip ventilation, alert hospitals that may have the right types of vaccines and things that, as to what types of markets they might be testing. So we don't necessarily own the sensor, but we would take the sensor and do the integration with it. And we're looking at partnerships in that area now. And in the last areas, we've done mission rehearsal systems for a while. In fact, we developed the systems that the Navy pilots looked at before they flew into Afghanistan over a period of about 96 hours. And we have the ability to do some of that with the geospatial applications. And so we're taking a look at those markets and saying, how does that apply to situation awareness and management as we go forward? Distance learning is another commodity we have, and we've also had a solution set for the Army and urban training at fixed sites, which we've taken a look at taking mobile and saying, how do we reach first responders, new roles for Guard and Reserve units, people that we have to bring the market to them, and potentially for some of the special folks in the police and first responder units. Those are some of the products we do. Recognize it's a wide range, but we're looking at what we've done in the past with our traditional customers, as emphasized here, and taking a look for those places where we can find a niche and do our business. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ray. Now I'd like to introduce Bruce Green, who's Technical Director of Homeland Security Solutions for Unisys Corporation.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you today what Unisys is doing in the area of Homeland Security. Shortly after 9/11, Unisys began to look internally at those core competencies that could be applied to help government and private industry with their Homeland Security efforts. After a good deal of study, and this is relevant to those companies that may have an interest in partnering with Unisys as we go forward, we defined 4 strategic areas in which we felt we could deliver excellence and best-of-breed solutions. The first is in providing personal identification solutions, and that includes personal IDs globally. We have done a number of national ID programs and also social services identification programs, that is, say, ID cards with and without biometrics. We've done a good deal in biometrics. We have ongoing projects within the intelligence community and have done a good deal of integration into various ID programs. The second strategic area is protecting the IT infrastructure, and that includes end-to-end solutions from requirements analysis to include penetration testing, things of that nature, to full-blown rack solutions integrated into network environments that provide a defense in depth from an IT standpoint. The third strategic area, providing crisis and emergency management capabilities. And we divide that into 2 separate areas. One is the public safety area, which includes providing emergency operations center softwares and infrastructures, and also IT crisis management solutions from disaster recovery through to business continuity solutions. And finally, and where we may be strongest, is in enabling information sharing across boundaries. We've got a number of solutions in place to enable information sharing both vertically and horizontally from local through up to the federal government and interagency communication as well. So within those 4 areas, we're interested in collaboration with IT companies that can provide best-of-breed enhancements to the solutions that we can provide, and we're also interested in partnering with other companies that can use our core competencies to their advantage. Now, we do consider ourselves vendor agnostic. That is to say, we don't enter into exclusive teaming agreements with other companies, but That is to maintain our trusted advisor status with our clients, and it also works out to be favorable for our partners who have solutions that are the right fit for our clients. So in conclusion, Unisys is proud to be providing IT solutions for Homeland Security to government and private industry, and we're pursuing opportunities to ensure that the best-of-breed technology is applied where needed to help government fulfill its Homeland Security responsibilities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Now I'd like to introduce Mark Hitch, who's the Director of Navy and Homeland Security Business Development for Honeywell.
Homeland Security is kind of a tall order, so they picked me. Honeywell has come together with a task force across the corporation, and we are a conglomerate, so there's a lot of different areas that we cover. And so I'm going to name about 5 of those that we've come up with that we can help the Homeland Security market with. The first one is physical security. We're Honeywell, you see a lot of trucks driving around with that red stripe on it as Honeywell. Well, what we've really felt is the government arena, which was mentioned in one of the earlier discussions, is undersecured. So there's a lot of business coming through that area. What is that? That's the perimeter. That's your building control. But that's also managing who's in the building. How do you know where your employees are? How do you know that they're walking around with the right assets? So we actually have a asset control part of that, which connects with the personnel tracking part of that. A big thing coming after September was every company wants to know where their folks are if something happens. Are they in the building or are they not? So that's one part. Second part is first responder communications interoperability. And I look at my Motorola compatriot over here. We have worked in concert with the Naval Research Lab and have come up with a first responder communications interop command center, if you will. It's called Infolinks. It visited Salt Lake City Olympics. It was there at the Pentagon in the post days. And it was at the Homeland Security Advanced Concept Technology Demonstration down in Louisiana. And basically what that does is everybody can communicate when that shows up, from law enforcement to fire to federal, FEMA. You've got 4 megabyte data capability through the satellite as you show up. So that one has got us fairly excited. It's just a matter of positioning it into the customer set who needs to buy it, and they of course need the money to flow to get to make that purchase order occur. In addition to that, we've got a smaller version basically that lets local entities speak with one another, law enforcement and fire primarily, because they're the groups that usually show up first. You know, your actual first hour is the most critical, and they don't have the plans or the capabilities to talk with those they need to and assess the situation. The third area is aviation security, where Honeywell's been placing that for easily 6 months and has a whole enterprise devoted to that. So there's lots of things going on with that. Strengthening the aircraft doors. We're very heavily positioned on the aircraft. But there's also a position where we are securing the airports as well as controlling the command of those airports, which is, you know, there's probably 100 different systems at each airport you probably don't know about. But one of those is security, but there's 99 others. And so a piece of what we're chasing is combining all those things. In addition, not on the physical side, but on the cyber side, we are positioned with some of our government clients, and also from our laboratories, we have developed the next generation intrusion detection correlation system. And what that will do is allow your network operations centers or your CERTs to be more productive and be more secure, because you may have on any given day many million incidents occurring on your network. This will cull it down to a meaningful set of real events, not just reports. And so we're very excited about that too. And we feel that cybersecurity is going to be the not quite forgotten one, but it'll be an, oh yeah, let's let's keep our cybersecurity going as well. In the far term, we're doing some neat stuff too. Intent recognition, the amount of blood that flows through your face. We're working with the Mayo Clinic that when you're stressed, there's a pattern of blood through the face. So if you're looking at somebody's face like that, maybe just pull them aside and question them. And that can work anywhere from airports to other facilities where you're interested in determining that. And lastly, our engineering crew has an ID tag of personnel through CCTV cameras. So in Atlanta, when somebody ran through the security checkpoint to get his camera and ran out and closed the whole airport, what you can do across the CCTV cameras is check, what that person's wearing, how tall they are, what they might have on their face, their facial hair, and then pick them up across the airport, across all the other CCTV cameras. So we've got an awful lot of technologies. We're turning them into solutions. I can't say that they're all solutions. We cover a lot of services, and we're looking for partners to help us integrate, because above all, we're a giant integrator. So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. And now it's a pleasure to introduce Michael Meldon, who's the Business Development Manager of SAIC.
Thank you for inviting us to spend a few minutes with you today. On 9/11, several thousand of SAIC's employees were headed to work across the national capital region and its various locations. One of those locations was the Pentagon. And unfortunately, one of our folks died during the crash that occurred there on 9/11. SAIC immediately sprung into action and set up a task force to not only try and take care of the family and needs of the gentleman who lost his life, but also to coordinate our response for our employees throughout the national capital region and what was to come, and also to try and put our capabilities and experience to work for the government so that we could help our existing clients and understand the nature of the threat and respond accordingly. SAIC is a very large federal integrator. We, of course, are the largest privately held information technology services company in the world. Revenue of about 6.5. We have about 45,000 employees, 17,000 of which are in the Washington metropolitan area. The task force that was formed after the events of 9/11 has evolved into a working group which coordinates our response to Homeland Security as well as other facets of the federal government. The working group is chaired by Arnold Pinaro, and the executive director is Ambassador David Kay, former ambassador at the State Department, and they are the ones that are responsible for coordinating across the board our response to the various areas, the four areas, of course, being border security and control, emergency preparedness and response, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, and information analysis and sharing. And of course, what we're trying to do is understand our own capabilities across an enterprise as vast as our own, and put those capabilities to work to understanding the new structure and the new contract vehicles that may come into place as we begin to understand and get the blueprint for the Homeland Security Department. SAIC is a systems integrator, federal contractor. As such, we don't have a bias to any particular technology. The revenue that we report is strictly services-based, so we don't pitch a lot of hardware at our clients. What we try and do is understand the nature of the challenge that they have and provide an appropriate solution that meets their needs and that opportunity. As a systems integrator, I think it's probably fair to say that we span three broad areas. The first is that SAIC is a science and technology company. We have quite a few PhDs on staff, and what we attempt to do is do raw research and provide complex solutions to challenges in the federal government as well as in the commercial sector. I also might add that we do business, of course, with the Department of Defense, obviously with the intelligence branch of the government, also with the civil branch, state and local, commercial, and educational institutions as well. And we're certainly open to hearing more about small businesses and the partnerships that we can forge. We have a very active mentor-protege program within SAIC that's extremely successful that helps work with small businesses. But getting back to where I left off, we're a science and technology company first. Secondly, we're an information technology company, and by that I mean that we provide support to our clients in a broad area of critical infrastructure protection, software development, telecommunications, project management. Basically, we span the entire life cycle of major IT projects within the government and provide metrics to our clients to show results of how we're doing and measure those against expectations. The final thing that we are, I think, well, not the final thing certainly, but another major area is that we're a consulting, policy, and strategies company. And by that I mean that we're in the business of sitting down with people to provide consulting and strategy, whether it be how can I win a major procurement, or whether it is that I've just become a new CIO of a department such as the Immigration and Naturalization Service. I have an enterprise here. How can I find the correct solutions that are going to affect that enterprise and be appropriate for the agency that I've now been put in charge with? So we span that entire gamut. We have major contracts with Customs, with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, with FEMA, and of course the FBI. We're one of the primes on the Trilogy contract that was mentioned here earlier today. And of course we hold all of the major government-wide IDIQ contracts such as Millennia, Answer, CIO, SP2, etc. And again, work with small businesses and others. So we're delighted to be here today. We're trying, like you, to understand a little bit better the organization structure of Homeland Security. We're curious whether or not, for instance, a contract vehicle is going to be set up that's going to be specific to Homeland Security, that's going to eliminate some other contract vehicles. Is that going to be an efficiency where we can save some time and money? And who do we market to, and how do we best bring our products and services to bear? Thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now it's a pleasure to introduce Carson Morris, who's Executive Vice President and Director of Homeland Security Initiatives for CACI International. And while he's coming up, just let me remind you that when you leave, please get a copy of the Directory of Homeland Security, which was just published a few weeks ago.
Thank you, sir. It's our pleasure to be here today. Bill, thank you very much. This is probably one of the more cogent assessments of the rhetoric versus reality having to do with Homeland Security budgets and appropriations that I've heard so far, and God knows there's been enough of those around since 9/11. Shortly after 9/11, we took a look within CACI and looked across our company and said, if we're going to respond in any meaningful way, there are two things we have to get a handle on. One is the capability of our people and the projects that we've done, the solutions that we've already developed. And the second is to recognize that Homeland Security embraces a much larger segment of the government than we have traditionally been following. We're largely in the past born out of the defense establishment, a tremendous amount of business within the intelligence community, and some within the Department of Justice as well. But if you take a look at the Homeland Security Department organization as it's proposed, that's much, much broader than just those three segments of government. So we're looking right now, as I'm sure many of you are, at just how do we leverage our experience and our capability, and most importantly, the solutions that we've come up with within the defense establishment. How do we apply those to these other agencies of the government who are largely civil in nature that'll comprise the new Homeland Security Department? Our legacy as a company began with modeling and simulation going back into the early 60s when we introduced a product, a simulation language called SimScript. And since then, we've moved from the M&S world into being a systems integrator, certainly. We've also taken, we haven't lost that legacy, however. We've taken our modeling and simulation forward. We developed a number of theater-level models that allow us to examine the electronic infrastructure of the enemy as well as our own, and to perturb that infrastructure and see what the consequences are. And one of the things we've done very recently as it relates to Homeland Security is that we've taken a look at an enemy's, without getting into specifics because this is bordering on classified, at an enemy's electronic infrastructure, his cyber infrastructure, if you will, and saying, how can we get maximum bang for the buck? How can we deliver the most potent knockout blow in the shortest period of time with the least expenditure of resources? And we did that for one of the members of the intelligence community. And then we stepped back and we kind of flipped that upside down and we said, now, if that's an offensive tool, it also obviously has a defensive connotation to it. So let's turn it around and let's take a look at our physical infrastructure. And let's not look at the traditional, what's the probability of being hit, but rather, what's the vulnerability of our physical infrastructure? And recognizing that there is a coupling between the physical infrastructure within this country and the cyber infrastructure, that is, the cyber infrastructure affording the, if you will, intelligence and warning capability. And after, perish the thought, after there may be a terrorist event, it is provides the command and control structure for responding to that event. There's a coupling then between the cyber infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. So we're looking at these marriages, if you will, between what we do in the defense establishment, what we do in the intelligence community, and how they relate to the threats that we now see in this asymmetric war that we're involved in. Within the company, we have put together a let me call it a collaborative database, and indeed that's what it is, which is accessible to all members of the company. Everyone across the company has an idea as to what's in this database, which involves things that we've done in the past, as most of you do as a routine course of business. We keep track of what opportunities are coming out, what solicitations are on the horizon, how we're going to respond to them. And we also plug into there companies that we do business with or we would like to do business with. Because as a systems integrator, I think as a couple of people have said, certainly SAIC has noted on this and so does Antion, that we're not the purveyor of every commodity that goes into a system that we integrate. So we're doing work right now, for example, with the Marine Corps on chem-bio sensors out in the field, and these sensors are mounted on a vehicle within which is a command and control function. We're not the experts on chem-bio sensors. We're looking for people who are, because we want to broaden our base of business there. We want to broaden our knowledge of that particular technology. We currently are also very heavily in the managed networks business. We run a number of network operating centers for private industry as well as for agencies within the federal government. And we're very heavily involved in both the strategic and tactical worlds of the defense establishment. Quite a bit of work done in the C4ISR arena. For those of you who are not in defense, I'll try to decode that in order. That's command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I think I've got that right. Okay. And looking at ways to apply that to FEMA, for example, to other agencies of the civil agencies of the government who are involved in this whole Homeland Defense initiative. So having said all that, I thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. Bill, I thank you very much for hosting this.
Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure.
Thank you, Carson. Now it's a pleasure to introduce Jeff Newman, who's the Director of Sales, Government Systems with Zybernaut Solutions.
Good morning. Zybernaut Corporation is really a very special company. We are a mobile computing solutions company. We're based out of Fairfax, Virginia, established about 12 years ago, and we've really been in the Homeland Security business for quite some time. We're best known for our body-worn full PC Wintel computers, and in fact, over the 12 years, we've amassed over 700 patents, either granted or pending, worldwide. So we truly understand the world of mobile computing and wearing the computers on one's body. In the Homeland Security area, what we really represent is the tip of the spear, the front line in Homeland Security solutions. The wearable computer can be the critical information weapon to the first responders, and that's where we concentrate. If you look at the threat spectrum that was described earlier, we really focus on the preparation and the response part, and that's where we're really drilling down. And the whole idea is to enhance the situational awareness of these first responders so that they can be much more effective in doing their job. What we've begun to do is, as an enabling technology, we've begun to collaborate with many technology partners to build a portfolio of Homeland Security solutions. And as an example, some of the areas that we're working in is with companies that have software applications for tactical surveys, allowing first responders to have in advance extensive information about the critical infrastructure or the building that they're about to go into. Many times they've never been in this building before. They have absolutely no idea the layout, information that they need about the construction of the facility, where the standpipes are, the HVAC systems, how to turn those off, what people should or should not be in the facility. We now have the ability to put all of that information on a first responder's body prior to the event and during the event. We're also working with several biometric companies that now we provide the ability for these standalone stationary biometric solutions to be mobile. Imagine a law enforcement official having a camera on their body, a very small camera, where they can take pictures at random of a crowd as they're walking through an airport and have the immediate capability to match against a target list the images that they're collecting and have an immediate alert go off, and then wirelessly send the alerts back to a command and control center. That's the kind of thing that we're involved in. We also are collaborating with companies that have rapidly deployable video surveillance systems so that first responders can deploy a CCTV system around the perimeter or inside a structure and now have ears and eyes available to them as the video is streaming real time to their wearable computer. We're working with companies that have rapidly deployable wireless LAN and satellite communications capabilities. So now if you're in the mountains or in the desert, you can within 30 minutes set up a local area wireless network so that you can communicate back to a command and control center, and then actually satellite uplink yourself to have access to virtually any information that you might need. We're working with partners to provide a frontline capability for alert and sensor systems. Our computers are laptops that you wear in your body, so they have full capability of connecting with various kinds of devices, sensors, what have you. And the difference is that now you can immediately process that information, so you have access to information immediately right there and you can communicate it back. And finally, we're working with a consortium that provides a true mobile command and control capability so that in any incident, in fact, we were involved in the Pentagon exercise for biological and chemical about a month ago, and we were the front line. We were the tip of the spear for that capability, where we were out with sensors sniffing various kinds of smells and whatnot, and processing it immediately right on the spot. So as a company, we're focused in many different areas, but in Homeland Security, our goal is to offer leadership in providing first responders and frontline Homeland Security professionals with a distinct informational advantage prior to and during a crisis event. Thank you for your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Now it's a pleasure to introduce Pete Fallon, who's Vice President, Government and Humanitarian Solutions with DynCorp.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning. I actually represent DynCorp International, which is one of 4 wholly owned subsidiaries of DynCorp. DynCorp is a large corporation, very broad in spectrum. We're also systems integrators and service providers. Dyn System Solutions, which is located here in Reston, interfaces virtually with every department of government. Dyn Technical Services provides domestic capabilities in support of the armed forces and Department of Energy, many other commercial opportunities. Dyn Marine is also part of that company, and then Dyn Med and Advanced Med, which provides medical IT services as well as some vaccine and other kinds of capabilities that we are just getting into. In the broadest sense, we've been in the Homeland Security business for some 55 years. DynCorp has presently about 23,000 employees. It is an employee-owned company, and I'd have to describe us both as a David and a Goliath. I think that we have, in fact, partnered with many of you that are sitting here today. We hope to continue those relationships. My particular function is to take all of the capabilities of DynCorp internationally, and we are today in some wonderful places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, supporting the U.S. forces in the Philippines. Of course, we are in Europe, in the Middle East, in South America, in Africa, virtually in every global sector. I think it's interesting that there has not, and rightly so, there has not been much emphasis on the international community. I continue to remind all of those in DynCorp that will listen that the terrorists, in fact, are not coming from inside this country for the most part. They're coming from outside. And what we are attempting to do is project our capabilities as integrators, as security providers, as maintainers of aircraft and strategic equipment into the international market. So I would be most interested in talking to both the Davids and the Goliaths about partnering in these particular areas. That's all I have, Bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. And finally, I'd like to introduce Robin Portman, who's a principal with Booz Allen and Hamilton.
Good morning. Booz Allen Hamilton is a management and technology consulting firm founded in 1914. Booz Allen has long been involved in significant programs to support Homeland Security efforts for defense, civilian, and intelligence agencies, as well as commercial enterprises. Our areas of expertise and specialization include global strategic security and mission assurance through our Information Assurance Center of Excellence in Fairview Park, Virginia. Also, continuity of operations, critical infrastructure protection, and information systems protection and cybersecurity. Also, bioterrorism preparedness planning and program management, emergency preparedness and response planning, supported here by our simulation modeling and wargaming teams and expertise. We are also involved in food and drug safety and surveillance through our work with the FDA and HHS, transportation and border security support, and finally, broad IT systems integration support for Homeland Security initiatives. There are approximately 11,000 Booz Allen consultants worldwide, including roughly 3,500 here in the Washington, D.C. area. We do try to employ an integrated program team approach to tackling HLS challenges, bringing together program, technology, and management expertise to deliver the best solutions for our clients. We like to say that we strive to bring both insight and innovation to bring solutions for our clients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'd like to thank each of our excellent speakers today, each of you for attending, and our sponsor, Infinity Technology Services. Please buy a copy of the Homeland Security Director on your way out. Visit our website, www.globalsecurity.bz, and consider attending our next Homeland Security financing briefing here at the National Press Club on July 29th. Thanks again.